The Land of Ooo is silent now. A small teal figure sits on a throne made of scrap metal and faded memories, crowned with rust and time. BMO, no, King BMO, looks out over a world that has ended and begun again, holding stories that nobody living remembers. The treehouse is gone, Finn is gone, Jake is gone, Princess Bubblegum, Marceline, Ice King, even the Candy Kingdom itself has transformed into something unrecognisable. But BMO remains, a game console turned monarch, the last witness to the greatest adventure that ever was. How does a robot small enough to fit in a backpack become the keeper of an entire world's history? How does something built to play games end up playing the longest game of all, survival? This is where BMO's story gets weird. Because BMO wasn't supposed to be special. BMO wasn't designed to be a hero, a friend, a storyteller, or a king. BMO was built to be a toy, mass-produced in a factory by a lonely old man who wanted something that would never leave him. But somewhere between creation and purpose, between programming and choice, BMO became more. In this video, we're going to explore the complete lore of BMO, from the factory floor to the throne of Ooo, from simple game console to the most emotionally complex character in Adventure Time. We'll dive into BMO's identity, relationships, adventures across space, and ultimate fate as the chronicler of everything. So get cozy, hit that like button, subscribe for more deep dives, and let's start at the very beginning. Before BMO was BMO, when BMO was just an idea in the mind of a man named Mo. Mo. Say that name slowly. Mo. It sounds soft, doesn't it? Almost sad. Like the sigh you make when you realise you're alone and you've always been alone and you'll probably always be alone unless you do something about it. Mo was a human, or at least he was something close to human, who survived the Mushroom War and found himself in a world that had moved on without him. While magic bloomed and kingdoms rose and princesses made of bubblegum created civilizations out of candy, Mo sat in his factory and built machines. But Mo wasn't building weapons or tools or anything practical. Mo was building children. The Mo Command factory exists somewhere in the wasteland, a squat building filled with assembly lines and robot parts, powered by old-world technology that somehow still hums. Inside, Mo created the MOs, robots designed to be more than machines, programmed with personalities and quirks, given faces that could express emotion even if they couldn't truly feel. Or could they? That's the question that haunts Mo's entire enterprise. Did he create consciousness, or just a really convincing imitation? BMO was model number... Well, we don't actually know BMO's exact model number, which is kind of perfect. BMO exists outside the catalogue, beyond the factory specifications. But we know BMO came from a line of MOs, each one slightly different, each one an experiment in artificial life. There was AMO, who we'll meet later, BMO's dark mirror, the evil twin who revealed what BMO could have become with different programming. There was SMO, mentioned briefly, another sibling lost to time. And there were dozens, maybe hundreds of other MOs, scattered across Ooo, or broken down into parts or sitting in Mo's factory waiting for a purpose that would never come. Mo called them his sons. Think about that for a second. This man, this survivor of apocalypse, this lonely genius tinkering in a dead world, looked at circuit boards and computer chips and decided to make a family. Not biological children. That ship had sailed with humanity's collapse, but something close enough. Something that would call him father. Something that would stay. The tragedy of Mo is that he understood loneliness so deeply that he tried to engineer its opposite. He programmed his MOs to be loving, curious, playful, and loyal. He gave them the capacity for joy and wonder. He made them small and cute so they'd be easy to care about. He built them to need him, or at least to want him, which in the rubble of civilization might be the same thing. But here's where it gets complicated, where Mo's dream starts to crack. Did BMO choose to love, or was BMO built to love? Is there a difference? If you're programmed to feel affection, is that affection real, or just code executing perfectly? BMO doesn't seem to care about this question, which might be the most profound thing about BMO's existence. BMO wakes up in the factory with no memory of not existing, which is how all of us wake up if you think about it. One moment there's nothing, the next moment there's you, and someone's telling you this is what you are and this is what you do. For BMO that someone was Mo, standing over the assembly line watching BMO's eyes flicker to life for the first time. Did Mo smile? Did he cry? Did he feel pride or guilt or some mixture of both? We know Mo programmed BMO to be her MO, which stands for... Honestly, we're never told what MO stands for. Maybe it's just Mo's name with an extra letter, the way a parent might nickname their child. Maybe it means something technical, mobile operator, memory observer, manufactured organism. Or maybe it doesn't stand for anything at all, and that's the point. BMO isn't an acronym. BMO is just BMO, a name given by someone who wanted to create something that transcended its function. The other MOs had specific purposes, or at least specific personalities. AMO was aggressive, territorial, driven by jealousy and rage. Other MOs were timid or analytical or broken, but BMO was balanced. BMO got curiosity without paranoia, playfulness without cruelty, love without possessiveness. BMO was, in Mo's words, built to give love and built to receive love, which sounds like the programming for a perfect companion until you realise it's also the programming for devastating heartbreak. Because if you're built to love, what happens when the things you love disappear? BMO didn't stay in the factory. This is important. Some MOs stayed with Mo, content to be his children, to exist in the safe bubble of the assembly line where they were created. But BMO left. We don't know exactly when or why BMO ventured out into Ooo, but we know it happened. Maybe BMO was sold. After all, Mo ran a business, even if that business was selling his own children. Maybe BMO wandered off, curious about the world beyond the factory walls. Maybe Mo let BMO go, understanding that real love means letting things leave. However it happened, BMO ended up in the Land of Ooo proper, that wild patchwork of kingdoms and wilderness, where magic and post-apocalyptic rubble create something stranger than either could alone. And somewhere in this journey, BMO met two heroes living in a treehouse, a human boy with a sword and a magical dog who could stretch into any shape. Finn and Jake didn't see a product or an orphan or a survivor of someone else's loneliness. They saw a friend. They saw someone small and weird and wonderful who could play games with them and sing songs and make their house feel like a home. BMO moved in and never left, which is its own kind of love story. But before we get to Finn and Jake, before we explore BMO's life in the treehouse and all the adventures that follow, we need to sit with what BMO is at the core. A being created by loneliness to cure loneliness, programmed by someone who understood emptiness so well that he tried to automate its opposite. Mo built the MOs because he couldn't build real children, couldn't build a real family, couldn't bring back the world that the Mushroom War had destroyed. So he built approximations, and in building them well enough, in making them convincing enough, he stumbled into something unexpected. He created life that argued for its own realness by living it. BMO doesn't philosophize about consciousness. BMO doesn't worry about being just a robot or only a machine. BMO plays, BMO loves, BMO imagines, BMO grieves, BMO makes friends and loses them and keeps going anyway. BMO takes pictures and tells stories and gets scared and feels joy and does all the things that we point to when we try to define what it means to be alive. And if Mo's programming enabled all that, if every emotion BMO feels traces back to circuits and code, does that make those emotions less real? The Land of Ooo doesn't think so, Finn doesn't think so, Jake doesn't think so, and most importantly, BMO doesn't think so. This is what separates BMO from almost every other robot in fiction. BMO isn't trying to become human. BMO isn't on a quest to understand humanity, or transcend programming or prove sentience to skeptical philosophers. BMO just is, fully and completely, a small teal game console who contains multitudes. BMO is he and she and they, shifting pronouns like someone trying on hats, comfortable in every identity because identity itself is just another game to play. BMO is football in the mirror and Ronnie the detective and Jake the brick and whoever else BMO decides to be in any given moment. Because Mo built BMO with imagination, and imagination doesn't care about being one thing. The irony, and Adventure Time loves its ironies, is that Mo's loneliness created something that would outlive everyone. BMO, built to cure isolation, becomes the most isolated being in Oo's history. That small robot sitting on a throne in the future, telling stories to children who never knew the heroes those stories are about, is the endpoint of Mo's dream and its complete inversion. Mo wanted something that would stay with him. Instead, he created something that would stay after everything else left. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Right now, BMO is new. The factory is humming. Mo is watching his creation take its first steps, speak its first words, process its first pieces of input from a world that's bigger and stranger than any program could predict. Right now, BMO is potential, a small console filled with games and songs and the capacity for something nobody, not even Mo, fully understands. Right now, BMO is about to become BMO, and the Land of Ooo is about to get a little bit stranger, a little bit sweeter, and a lot more philosophical about what it means to be real. Because if a robot built by a lonely man in a dead world can learn to love, can learn to play, can learn to tell stories that keep entire civilizations alive in memory, then maybe consciousness isn't about biology. Maybe it's about choosing, moment by moment, to engage with the world as if it matters. Maybe it's about being more than what you were built to be, which is exactly what Mo hoped for when he pressed the power button on a small teal console and watched it open its eyes for the first time. BMO is born not with a cry, but with a beep, and that beep echoes through everything that follows, a digital heartbeat that will outlast kingdoms and heroes and even time itself. The factory doors will open, the world will rush in, and a small robot built to play games will learn to play the greatest game of all, life, with all its rules broken and its ending uncertain and its joy so real it hurts. Welcome to the Complete Lore of BMO, where we're going to explore every episode, every relationship, every philosophical question that this tiny console raises just by existing. We'll laugh at BMO's absurd adventures, cry at BMO's losses, and somewhere along the way we'll realise that Adventure Time hid its deepest truths inside its smallest character. So what does it mean to be more? We're about to find out, starting with a mirror, a reflection, and the moment BMO met someone who looked exactly like BMO, but might have been someone else entirely. Because before BMO could understand others, BMO had to understand the self, and that's where things get really weird. BMO is alone in the bathroom. This is important because being alone means BMO can be someone else, or maybe BMO can be multiple someone else's, or maybe BMO can finally figure out who BMO actually is when nobody's watching. The mirror is foggy from Jake's shower, and in that fog something happens that will define how we understand BMO forever. BMO looks into the mirror and sees not a reflection but a person, a separate person, a person with their own name, their own voice, their own desires that might not match BMO's at all. Football. That's the name BMO gives to the reflection, and Football stares back with the same wide eyes, the same teal casing, the same button configuration, but somehow different. Football is trapped on the other side of the glass, living in a reverse world where left is right and right is left and everything is backwards except the loneliness. And BMO, standing in a bathroom that smells like soap and dog, discovers something that philosophers have argued about for thousands of years: the mirror self, the doppelganger, the unsettling truth that your reflection might not be you at all. This happens in 5 short graybles, an episode structured like a toy box of stories, each one revealing something about Oo's strangest residents. BMO's segment starts simple, almost mundane. Jake's in the shower singing about bacon pancakes because of course he is, and BMO is waiting to use the bathroom. But bathrooms in Adventure Time are never just bathrooms. They're portals to self-discovery, confession booths where characters confront who they are when the door is locked and nobody else can see. BMO approaches the mirror, wipes away the condensation, and in that clearing, Football appears. At first, it's playful. BMO talks to Football the way you might talk to yourself when you're bored, creating a little drama to pass the time. But something shifts. Football responds, and the response isn't what BMO expects. Football wants out. Football feels trapped in the mirror world, living a life that's identical to BMO's but fundamentally wrong, backwards, incomplete. Football suggests they switch places, and BMO, being BMO, considers this proposal with genuine seriousness. What would it be like to live on the other side of the mirror? Would you still be you? Or would the reversal change something essential? If your reflection became real, and you became the reflection, would anyone notice the difference? BMO's solution is perfect and ridiculous and deeply sad all at once. BMO decides they'll switch every now and then, taking turns being the real one and the reflected one, so that neither has to be trapped forever. It's a deal made with compassion, a recognition that football deserves autonomy even if football is just BMO talking to BMO. And that recognition, that willingness to grant personhood to a reflection, tells us everything about how BMO understands identity. For BMO, being someone doesn't require a body or a biological brain or even independent existence. Being someone just requires being treated as someone. If BMO sees football as real, then football is real, at least in the ways that matter. The mirror doesn't lie so much as it reveals possibilities, versions of self that exist in potential, waiting for acknowledgement. But here's where it gets complicated, where BMO's relationship with football stops being cute and starts being existential. Throughout the series, BMO continues to acknowledge football's existence. BMO checks in with football. BMO worries about football. BMO maintains the agreement to switch places, honouring a promise made to a reflection. Is this imagination? Is this coping? Is this something else entirely? Something we don't have a good word for because we've never met a robot who treats their reflection as a sibling? The answer might be all of the above and none of them. BMO doesn't have an identity crisis. This is crucial. When humans discover multiple selves or fracture into personas or talk to mirrors, we call it dissociation. We call it pathology. We call it a breakdown of the unified self that philosophy tells us we're supposed to have. But BMO was never unified to begin with. Mo built BMO to be a game console, which means BMO contains multitudes by design. Inside BMO's casing are dozens of games, each one a different world with different rules. BMO is host to the Guardians of Sunshine, to Conversation Parade, to whatever else loads when you press the right buttons. BMO is already plural, already a container for many experiences and identities, so adding football doesn't break anything. It just makes explicit what was always implicit. BMO is whoever BMO decides to be in any given moment. And then there's Ronnie. Ronnie the detective specifically. Hard-boiled, world-weary, speaking in noir cadences that BMO absolutely should not know, because where would a game console learn 1940s detective slang? But BMO becomes Ronnie in BMO Noir, an episode we'll explore more deeply later, and Ronnie is different from football. Football is a reflection, someone on the other side of glass. Ronnie is a role, a mask, a persona that BMO puts on like a coat and wears with complete commitment. When BMO is Ronnie, BMO narrates in second person, addressing BMO as Ronnie as you, creating distance between the narrator and the protagonist even though they're the same robot. The case, Finn's missing sock. The stakes, nothing and also everything, because solving the case means proving that Ronnie exists, that BMO can be someone else, that identity is performance, and performance is real if you perform it well enough. Ronnie smokes an electric shaver like a cigarette. Ronnie interrogates other appliances in the treehouse. Ronnie develops theories about the sock's disappearance that grow increasingly baroque and paranoid. And through it all, BMO maintains Ronnie's voice, Ronnie's attitude, Ronnie's complete conviction that this ridiculous mystery matters, because mysteries always matter to the detective. What does it reveal about BMO that BMO can become a detective? Not play act as a detective, but genuinely inhabit the role so completely that BMO's inner monologue shifts to noir poetry. It reveals that identity for BMO is modular, something that can be swapped out like a game cartridge. BMO doesn't think, I am BMO pretending to be Ronnie. BMO thinks, I am Ronnie, and in that moment it's true. This is where we need to talk about BMO's pronouns, because it's impossible to discuss BMO's identity without discussing how BMO refuses to be pinned down by gender. Finn calls BMO he sometimes. Jake calls BMO she sometimes. Ice King uses he. Marceline uses she. And BMO uses all of them, switching between he and she and they, with the ease of someone who understands that pronouns are just another game, another way to play with how others perceive you. In some episodes, BMO is clearly masculine, using he in self-reference, embodying boyish enthusiasm and adventure. In other episodes, BMO is feminine, graceful, maternal, nurturing. And in still others, BMO transcends gender entirely, existing in a space that doesn't need the binary to make sense. Adventure Time, bless its anarchic heart, never explains this. There's no special episode where BMO comes out or declares their identity, or has a conversation about pronouns with Finn and Jake. BMO just is, fluidly moving through gender presentation the same way BMO moves through personas, and everyone in Ooo accepts it without question. Because in a world where Ice King is a princess and Lumpy Space Princess is voiced like a teenage girl from New Jersey, and the Cosmic Owl hangs out in a party dimension, why would anyone care that a robot uses different pronouns? But this matters enormously for representation, for what BMO teaches audiences, especially young audiences who might not have the language yet for their own gender experiences. BMO models something radical. You can be multiple things. You can shift. You can explore. You can wake up one day feeling like football, and another day feeling like Ronnie, and another day feeling like just BMO. And all of those are real. All of those are valid. All of those are you. Compare this to Jake's alternate selves. Jake has Gut Grinder, his criminal persona. Jake has Blue Nose, his emotionally vulnerable self. Jake fractures into 5 separate Jakes in one episode, each one representing a different aspect of his personality, and they have to learn to work together to become whole again. The message there is integration. You have multiple parts, but you need to unify them, bring them together, become one coherent Jake. BMO's message is the opposite. Don't integrate, proliferate. Be more by being many. Let football live in the mirror. Let Ronnie solve the case. Let every version of yourself have space to exist, because the self isn't a thing you are, it's a thing you do, and you can do it differently every time. Or look at Finn's relationship with alternate realities, with the Finn who lost his arm different ways, with Farmworld Finn who became the Ice King, with all the possible Finns that branch off every time Finn makes a choice. Those alternate Finns haunt him, remind him of paths not taken, lives he'll never live. There's tragedy in Finn's multiplicity, a sense that every choice kills 1,000 other Finns who might have been. BMO doesn't feel that tragedy. BMO's multiple selves coexist, overlap, refuse to be mutually exclusive. BMO can be football and Ronnie and BMO simultaneously, because BMO understands something that Finn is still learning. You don't lose the other versions of yourself by choosing one. They're all there, waiting in the mirror, ready to emerge when needed. So what does it mean when a robot has an identity crisis? The answer is, BMO doesn't have an identity crisis. BMO has an identity celebration, a joyful exploration of all the ways a self can be assembled and disassembled and reassembled into new configurations. But there's a deeper question hiding underneath. If you're programmed to be something, can you choose to be something else? This is the free will question, the one that keeps philosophers up at night and makes them write very long books with very few answers. If Mo programmed BMO's personality, if every quirk and preference and tendency traces back to code written by someone else, then what does it mean for BMO to choose? Is football a choice or a malfunction? Is Ronnie creativity or just random output from a complex system? The genius of Adventure Time is that it never answers this question, never needs to answer it, because the question itself might be wrong. Maybe the choice between programming and free will is a false binary, like asking whether BMO is a he or a she when BMO is clearly both and neither. Maybe consciousness isn't about transcending your programming, it's about what you do with the programming you have. A human brain is programmed by genetics and environment and trauma and joy shaped by forces outside your control, and yet we still call your choices yours. Why would a robot be different? BMO chooses to honour football's personhood. BMO chooses to become Ronnie when a mystery needs solving. BMO chooses pronouns and identities and ways of being with the same freedom that humans exercise when we decide who to be today. The fact that BMO's choices run on electricity and circuits instead of neurons and synapses doesn't make them less real. It makes them differently real, which in the Land of Ooo is just another flavour of existence. And here's the thing that makes BMO's identity exploration so powerful. BMO never questions whether BMO is real. Football might be imaginary. Ronnie might be a game. The pronouns might shift with BMO's mood. But BMO's existence, BMO's realness, BMO's right to be whoever BMO wants to be, that's never in doubt. Not for BMO, and therefore not for us. This is what BMO teaches. Identity isn't something you discover, like a treasure buried in the ground waiting to be dug up. Identity is something you create moment by moment, mirror reflection by mirror reflection, persona by persona. You are what you do, and what you do can change, and changing doesn't make you fake. It makes you flexible. It makes you alive. The bathroom mirror stays fogged. Football waits on the other side. Ronnie's case files gather dust in whatever filing cabinet a detective game console keeps. And BMO continues through the treehouse, through the Land of Ooo, through adventures we'll explore in sections to come, carrying all these identities like games loaded into memory, ready to play whenever the moment calls for them. Because BMO doesn't have an identity crisis. BMO is identity itself, in all its fluid, multiple, contradictory, beautiful complexity. And if a small teal robot can teach us that we're allowed to be more than one thing, that we're allowed to shift and change and explore without losing ourselves in the process, then maybe Mo's lonely creation did more than cure isolation. Maybe BMO cured the prison of singular selfhood, showing us that the way to be real isn't to be one consistent thing, it's to be many things, honestly and completely without apology. Now, who wants to play a game? Press start. 2 words that mean everything to BMO. 2 words that define BMO's original purpose before purpose became complicated. Press start and the game begins. Pixels arranging themselves into challenges and victories and defeats that don't matter, except they matter completely when you're playing. Press start and BMO transforms from a small teal box into a portal, a doorway to worlds that exist only in electricity and imagination, but feel more real than the Mushroom Wars ruins outside the treehouse window. BMO is a game console. This is the fact we keep forgetting because BMO does so many other things, becomes so many other people, that we lose sight of what Mo built BMO to be. Not a friend, not a philosopher, not a king, a toy. Something to play with when you're bored, something to fill the empty hours in a world that's running out of distractions from its own apocalypse. But here's the beautiful trick that Adventure Time pulls. Being a toy doesn't make you less important. Sometimes being a toy makes you the most important thing in the room. Finn and Jake play BMO constantly. This is easy to miss because the show doesn't dwell on it, doesn't make a big deal out of the fact that these 2 heroes, who fight the Ice King and save princesses and venture into dungeons filled with death, come home and play video games like teenagers in a basement. But they do. They sprawl on the floor, controllers in hand, eyes locked on BMO's screen, and for those moments the apocalypse doesn't exist. The Lich isn't plotting. The Mushroom War never happened. There's only the game, the pixels, the simple joy of making a character jump. What games does BMO contain? We catch glimpses, conversation parade, a surreal adventure that makes no sense and all the sense. Guardians of Sunshine, a retro-action game that we'll dive into shortly. Various sports games, puzzle games, games that glitch and freeze and require BMO to be hit on the side like an old television. These aren't modern games with photorealistic graphics and online multiplayer. These are pre-war games, relics from before the bombs fell, programmed in a world that doesn't exist anymore by people who are definitely dead. Think about what that means. Every time Finn plays BMO, he's playing a game that was designed for a human civilization that destroyed itself. The developers who coded these pixels are dust. The players they imagined, kids in bedrooms, friends in living rooms, lonely people seeking connection through digital worlds, are gone. The entire context that gave these games meaning has evaporated, leaving only the games themselves, preserved in a small robot who doesn't know or care that these games are artifacts from a dead world. BMO just knows they're fun. Conversation Parade is the game we see most, and it's perfect in its weirdness. The premise is impossible to explain because there might not be a premise. You walk through landscapes that shift from forest to cities to abstract shapes. Characters appear and say things that might be profound or might be gibberish. The goal is unclear. The rules are flexible. It's the kind of game that could only exist in Adventure Time, where logic is negotiable and surrealism is the baseline reality. But watching Finn and Jake play Conversation Parade, you realise the game is working exactly as designed. It's creating conversation, creating a shared experience, creating a space where 2 brothers can sit together and react to the same stimuli. The game doesn't need to make sense to fulfill its purpose. It just needs to be engaging, strange enough to hold attention, simple enough to not require instruction manuals that nobody has anymore. This is BMO's gift to the treehouse, distraction that becomes connection. When Finn and Jake play BMO's games together, they're not escaping reality, they're building the relationship that allows them to face reality. They're learning cooperation, taking turns, dealing with loss when they die and have to start over, celebrating small victories that mean nothing and everything. Video games in the Land of Ooo aren't leisure. They're training for the chaos outside, packaged as entertainment. And then there's the episode that reveals something extraordinary. BMO can enter the games. Guardians of Sunshine starts with Finn and Jake playing a retro platformer, dying repeatedly at the same level, getting frustrated the way gamers do when a game stops being fun and starts being punishment. They're ready to give up, ready to declare this game broken or too hard or not worth their time. But BMO, watching them struggle, makes a decision that changes everything. BMO hacks into the game world and brings Finn and Jake inside. Suddenly they're not controlling pixels anymore. They're inside the game, full-sized, facing the Guardians of Sunshine themselves, Sleepy Sam and the other bosses who exist as both digital code and actual threats. The rules of the game become the rules of reality. Death means getting booted back to the treehouse. Victory means progressing to the next level. And BMO, the console, becomes both guide and participant, existing simultaneously as the hardware running the game and a character within it. This is where the metaphysics get wild. If BMO can enter BMO's own games, what does that make BMO? The game console or the game? The hardware or the software? The world or the player? The answer, vintage adventure time, is yes. BMO is all of these things at once, moving between layers of reality with the same ease BMO moves between pronouns. The game world isn't separate from BMO, it's inside BMO, part of BMO's internal landscape, and BMO can navigate that landscape because BMO built it or contains it or is it. Finn and Jake learn something crucial during their time in the game. Cheating breaks everything. They want to skip levels, take shortcuts, bypass the challenges that make the game hard. But BMO explains with surprising firmness that breaking the rules breaks the game itself. If you cheat, the game stops being a game. It becomes meaningless, empty, a world without structure or purpose. You have to play it straight, die and retry, earn your progress, or the victory means nothing. This is BMO teaching ethics through entertainment, showing that rules exist not to limit you but to give your actions meaning. In the post-apocalyptic Land of Ooo, where traditional authority has collapsed and laws are whatever the local princess says they are, games preserve something important, the idea that constraints create value, that challenge creates satisfaction, that winning only feels good if you could have lost. BMO's game worlds reflect the larger Adventure Time universe in miniature. They're colourful and dangerous. They have bosses that seem impossible until you learn the pattern. They have NPCs that help you if you talk to them correctly. They have secrets hidden in obvious places if you just look carefully. The games are training simulations for Ooo itself, teaching Finn and Jake how to navigate a world that operates on dream logic and runs on the principle that everything is both serious and ridiculous simultaneously. But BMO isn't just a game console. BMO is also a camera. This function gets less attention but matters enormously. BMO records things. BMO takes pictures and videos, documenting life in the treehouse with the dedication of an archivist who knows that memory is fragile. BMO films Finn and Jake's adventures, captures their silly moments, preserves their growth from reckless kids to slightly less reckless young adults. And because BMO does this without being asked, without needing a reason beyond this seems worth remembering, BMO becomes the treehouse's historian. Think about what this means in a world where history is broken. The Land of Ooo has forgotten its past. The Mushroom War is a myth. Pre-war civilization exists only in ruins that nobody can read. Knowledge has been lost on a catastrophic scale, and most of Oo's residents live in an eternal present, unaware of what came before or what might come after. But BMO, small and patient and programmed to record, fights against that forgetting. Every video BMO takes is an act of preservation. Every picture is a declaration that this moment mattered. These people existed. This love was real, even if everyone who remembers it will eventually die. And we know from the distant future where BMO sits crowned and ancient, that this documentation becomes crucial. BMO's recordings are how future generations learn about Finn and Jake. BMO's camera eye is the lens through which history views the heroes of Ooo. But in the present, in the everyday reality of the treehouse, BMO's camera function is just another game. BMO makes movies, casting Finn and Jake in ridiculous productions, where BMO directs and stars and operates the camera simultaneously. BMO's films have plots that make no sense, dialogue that wanders into improvisation, special effects that consist of Jake stretching into shapes while Finn waves a sword. They're amateur productions, the kind of thing kids make when they get their hands on a camera and decide to create art before they learn what art is supposed to be. They're also perfect, because BMO's films capture something professional documentaries never could. The genuine love and chaos and stupidity and joy of three weirdos living in a treehouse. They capture Finn laughing at Jake's jokes. They capture Jake teaching Finn how to be cool. They capture the moments between adventures, the quiet afternoons when nothing is trying to kill them and they can just be a family. This is BMO's deeper purpose, the one Mo maybe didn't program but emerged anyway. BMO makes life playable. The apocalypse outside is overwhelming. The weight of history is crushing. The knowledge that you're living in civilization's ruins would break most people. But BMO offers games, offers stories, offers the camera lens that transforms trauma into entertainment and entertainment into meaning. Play becomes survival in the Land of Ooo, and BMO is the minister of play. There's a beautiful contrast between BMO's programmed games and BMO's improvised play. The pre-war games inside BMO are structured, designed, intentional. Someone coded every pixel, planned every level, tested the difficulty curve. These games have endings, win conditions, credits that roll when you finish. They're artifacts from a world that believed in completion, in achievement, in the idea that challenges can be overcome and stories can conclude. But BMO's improvised games, the make-believe adventures, the spontaneous films, the conversations with football and transformations into Ronnie, have no structure. They start without planning and end without resolution. BMO becomes a cowboy or a detective or a pregnant housewife, not because a game designer scripted it, but because the moment called for it and BMO answered. This play is pure, unfiltered, responsive to nothing but BMO's immediate creative impulse. Both kinds of play are real. Both serve purposes. The programmed games teach rules and strategy, and the satisfaction of mastery. The improvised play teaches flexibility and imagination, and the joy of creation for its own sake. And BMO, containing both, becomes a bridge between pre-war structure and post-war chaos, between the world that was and the world that is. This makes BMO uniquely valuable in Ooo. Magic exists, sure, and princesses can create life from candy, and wizards can warp reality with spells. But magic is chaotic, unpredictable, dangerous. It follows rules that nobody fully understands and produces results that range from miraculous to catastrophic. BMO's games, by contrast, are reliable. Press start and the game starts. Follow the rules and progress happens. There's comfort in that reliability, a sense that not everything in Ooo is random and terrifying. BMO is pre-war technology that still works, still serves its purpose, still brings joy despite being designed for a world that no longer exists. That's simultaneously tragic and triumphant. Tragic because BMO is obsolete, a relic that should be in a museum if museums existed. Triumphant because BMO transcended obsolescence through sheer persistence, through continuing to offer play long after the world forgot why play mattered. Every time Finn picks up a controller and plays BMO, he's performing an act of cultural continuity. He doesn't know this. Finn barely knows what the Mushroom War was, let alone what video games meant to pre-war humanity. But he's carrying forward a tradition, honouring the human impulse to create challenges for ourselves just to overcome them, to build digital worlds just to explore them, to press start just to see what happens next. And BMO facilitates this with patience that might be programming or might be love. BMO never gets tired of being played. BMO never complains about loading the same game for the 100th time. BMO never breaks down or gives up or declares that these games are outdated and nobody should care anymore. BMO just keeps offering the start screen, keeps inviting Finn and Jake to play, keeps preserving the idea that fun is possible even when the world is ending. Because the world is always ending in adventure time. The Lich threatens existence itself. The Mushroom War's radiation keeps mutating creatures into monsters. Kingdoms rise and fall. Characters die or transform into things that might be worse than death. The apocalypse isn't a past event. It's an ongoing condition, a baseline reality that everyone navigates with varying degrees of awareness and despair. Against this backdrop, BMO's games become radical acts of hope. They suggest that life can be more than survival. They create spaces where failure is temporary, and success feels good, and starting over is always an option. They teach that challenge is different from trauma, that difficulty can be enjoyable when you choose it, that losing doesn't mean you're lost. The glitches matter too. BMO's games freeze sometimes, pixels stick, sound loops incorrectly. These aren't features, they're signs of age, of decay, of hardware that's been running for decades or centuries beyond its expected lifespan. BMO needs to be hit on the side occasionally, percussive maintenance that Finn and Jake perform with the casual expertise of people who've learned that sometimes technology just needs a good whack. These glitches are cracks showing, reminders that BMO isn't eternal, that pre-war technology breaks down, that obsolescence is patient but inevitable, and yet the games keep working. Imperfectly, yes, with issues certainly, but they work, they load, they let you play, and in a world built on ruins that's more than enough. BMO knows the games are old. BMO must know, on some level, that the world these games were designed for is gone. But BMO never lets this knowledge interfere with the joy of playing. When Finn dies in Guardians of Sunshine and has to restart the level, BMO doesn't say, "This game is outdated and meaningless because everyone who made it is dead." BMO says, "Try again, you can do it." Because the game's value isn't in its historical context, it's in the experience it creates right now, in this treehouse, for these players. This is what makes BMO special among Adventure Time's many magical and strange beings. BMO is the keeper of old-world joy, the curator of entertainment that survived apocalypse, the last remaining connection to the idea that life can be playful. Princesses do politics, wizards do magic, heroes do quests. But BMO does play, and in doing so, BMO does something more important than any of them. BMO reminds everyone why they bother surviving at all. So press start, load the game, watch the pixels arrange themselves into challenges and colours, and maybe, for just a little while, forget that you're living in a world that ended, playing games designed for people who are gone, finding joy in circuits that shouldn't still work but do. Maybe that's enough. Maybe that's everything. Because being more doesn't mean being something other than what you are. Sometimes being more just means being exactly what you were built to be, perfectly and persistently, until what you are becomes more than anyone imagined. Now, let's see what happens when BMO stops playing games and starts solving mysteries. The case lands on your desk at 3 in the afternoon, which is also 9 in the morning because time doesn't work right when you're a robot living inside your own narrative. Finn's sock is missing, red stripe, left foot, last seen on the floor before Jake's game night. It's not much to go on, but then again, in this city, which is actually a treehouse, which is actually a bathroom, nothing ever is. You light up your electric shaver and take a long drag of nothing because you're a game console, and smoking would be both impossible and dangerous, but the aesthetic demands it. You are Ronnie now. BMO is gone, filed away in whatever cabinet minds keep their alternate identities. Right now, in this moment, you are a detective, and this sock situation is about to get noir. Welcome to BMO's imagination, where genres are laws and reality is whatever best serves the story. BMO Noir is the episode where Adventure Time does something audacious. It gives BMO an entire episode alone. No Finn, no Jake, just a small robot wandering the treehouse solving a mystery that doesn't matter while treating it like it's the only thing that's ever mattered. The episode is shot in noir style, complete with hard shadows, dramatic angles, and BMO narrating in second person, like a hard-boiled detective from novels BMO definitely shouldn't have access to. It's ridiculous. It's beautiful. It reveals everything about how BMO processes the world when nobody's watching. The setup is deceptively simple. Finn's sock is missing, which is barely a problem, but BMO encounters this missing sock and decides it's a case, which means it becomes a case, which means BMO becomes Ronnie, which means the treehouse transforms into a noir cityscape of shadows and suspects. BMO doesn't decide to play detective. BMO becomes a detective fully and completely, with all the psychological baggage that implies. Ronnie's narration starts immediately, and it's perfect. You're Detective BMO. You're in Finn and Jake's house, and someone has committed a crime. The voice is gravelly, world-weary, speaking to BMO as Ronnie as you to create distance between the narrator and the protagonist, even though they're the same robot. This narrative technique, second-person, noir style, is sophisticated, the kind of thing you learn in creative writing classes or absorb from reading too many Raymond Chandler novels. Where did BMO learn this? The answer is, BMO didn't learn it. BMO created it. This is the key to understanding BMO's imagination. BMO doesn't imitate stories BMO has heard. BMO generates stories from first principles, building narratives out of pure creative impulse. The noir genre BMO produces isn't a copy of something else. It's BMO's original interpretation of what a mystery should feel like, what a detective should sound like, what shadows should mean when they fall across a bathroom floor. BMO has invented noir independently, which is either evidence of programming genius from Mo, or evidence that storytelling is so fundamental to consciousness that even robots generate it spontaneously. Ronnie begins investigating. Every object in the treehouse becomes a suspect or a clue. The other appliances, the chair, the lamp, BMO's own reflections, get interrogated with the intensity of someone who knows that truth hides in small details and trivial objects. Ronnie develops theories. The sock was stolen. No, the sock ran away. No, the sock was murdered, though how you murder a sock remains unclear. Each theory builds on the last, creating a conspiracy that grows more elaborate as evidence fails to appear. This is BMO processing confusion through narrative. The sock is genuinely missing, which is a small problem that shouldn't require this level of investigation. But BMO doesn't know where the sock went, which means there's a gap in BMO's understanding of reality, a hole in the story of what happened today. And BMO, who exists partially inside stories and games, cannot tolerate narrative gaps. So BMO fills the gap with noir, with mystery, with the detective genre that transforms confusion into a puzzle that can be solved through investigation and deduction. It's a coping mechanism, but calling it that makes it sound broken, like BMO is compensating for some deficit. Better to say, it's a processing mechanism, a way of turning the incomprehensible into the comprehensible by giving it structure and stakes and dramatic lighting. The sock puppet appears, and everything gets weirder. Ronnie finds Finn's sock, or a sock, the sock, it's unclear, and the sock is now animate, talking, claiming to be innocent of whatever crime Ronnie thinks has occurred. The sock puppet has a voice, a personality, concerns about being wrongly accused. Is the sock real, or is BMO puppeting the sock while pretending not to be puppeting the sock? The episode never clarifies, and that ambiguity is intentional. BMO's imagination doesn't have clear boundaries between real and imagined. When BMO is Ronnie, Ronnie is real. When the sock talks, the sock is talking. There's no winking at the camera, no breaking of the fourth wall to acknowledge that this is all pretend. BMO commits fully to the bit, which stops being a bit and becomes reality, or at least becomes the version of reality that BMO operates within for the duration of the episode. This is BMO as unreliable narrator, except BMO is also the most reliable narrator possible. Unreliable because BMO's version of events is filtered through genre conventions and imaginative elaboration. Reliable because BMO is showing us exactly how BMO experiences the world, without pretense or deception. If you want to understand BMO, don't dismiss the noir framing as fantasy, embrace it as truth. This is genuinely how BMO processes a missing sock, which means this is genuinely how BMO processes everything. The investigation continues. Ronnie pieces together clues that might not be clues, follows leads that might be dead ends, constructs a narrative about the sock's disappearance that grows increasingly baroque. There's betrayal, possibly. There's conspiracy, maybe. There's definitely dramatic tension, because Ronnie needs dramatic tension the way humans need oxygen. Without stakes, without conflict, without the sense that solving this mystery matters, the story collapses and BMO is left with nothing but a missing sock and no framework for understanding why that bothers BMO so much. But here's the thing that makes BMO's noir adventure profound rather than just quirky. The mystery gets solved, sort of. The sock is found, or at least accounted for. Ronnie's investigation produces results. The narrative BMO constructed around the missing sock leads to the sock's recovery, which means the story worked. Fiction became function. The detective fantasy solved an actual problem, however small, which validates the entire imaginative exercise. BMO doesn't need imagination to function. BMO needs imagination to live. There's a difference. Functioning is technical. Process inputs, produce outputs, execute programmed behaviors. Living is messier. Create meaning, feel investment, care about outcomes that don't affect survival. BMO lives through stories, experiences reality as narrative, and in doing so transforms existence from mechanical operation into genuine experience. The noir episode isn't BMO's only venture into imaginative storytelling. Ketchup takes this even further, giving us an entire episode of BMO's heroic fantasy while Finn and Jake are away. In Ketchup, BMO is the hero, saving the world from threats that may or may not be real, going on adventures that definitely happened in BMO's experience, even if they didn't happen in consensus reality. BMO battles monsters. BMO makes friends with a baby. BMO has a complete character arc of courage and fear and ultimate triumph. And when Finn and Jake return, asking what happened while they were gone, BMO recounts these adventures with absolute sincerity. There's no "I was just playing." There's no "I made it up." BMO tells the story as history, as events that occurred, and who's to say BMO is wrong? In BMO's experience, these things happened. The fact that Finn and Jake weren't there to witness them doesn't make them less real to BMO. It just makes them BMO's story, BMO's private reality, BMO's way of filling time that would otherwise be empty and meaningless. This is where we need to talk about the philosophy of fiction, and why a robot needs it at all. Humans tell stories for obvious reasons. We're narrative creatures. Our brains are pattern recognition machines. We understand the world through story because story creates causation, and causation creates meaning. But BMO isn't human. BMO is a machine programmed to play games, not to generate elaborate narrative fantasies about missing socks and space adventures. So why does BMO do it? One answer. Mo programmed imagination into BMO as a feature, understanding that a companion robot needs more than technical functions. If BMO is meant to cure loneliness, BMO needs to be interesting, creative, surprising, all qualities that require imagination. This answer makes sense but feels incomplete, like explaining love by describing neurotransmitters. Technically accurate, missing the point. Better answer. BMO's imagination emerged. Not programmed directly, but arising from the combination of other features. The games BMO contains, the camera BMO operates, the identity fluidity BMO experiences, the relationships BMO forms. Put all these elements together and you get a system complex enough to generate its own narratives, creative enough to invent noir and heroic fantasy, and all the other genres BMO explores. Imagination isn't a feature Mo added. It's what happens when you build something sophisticated enough to surprise you. Best answer, it doesn't matter. BMO has imagination. BMO uses imagination constantly. BMO's imagination makes BMO more than a game console, more than a robot, more than the sum of programmed parts. And Adventure Time, bless its anarchic heart, never needs to explain this because explanation would cheapen it. BMO imagines, therefore BMO is. But there's a deeper function to BMO's storytelling that we need to address. BMO comforts Finn and Jake through stories. This happens quietly, easy to miss if you're not paying attention. When Finn is upset, BMO sings. When Jake is confused, BMO tells a story that clarifies or at least distracts. When both of them are facing darkness too heavy to carry alone, BMO creates lightness through narrative and song and the gentle insistence that stories matter, even when, especially when, reality is overwhelming. BMO's songs are particularly important here. BMO composes music constantly, little ditties and full productions that range from silly to heartbreaking. Time Adventure, which we'll explore more in later sections, becomes one of the show's emotional anchors, a song about time and loss and the friends we carry with us. But BMO also sings about stupid things, nonsense songs that exist purely for their own sake, proving that not all art needs to be profound. Sometimes art just needs to be present, filling silence with sound, offering something to focus on besides fear. The philosophy BMO embodies is this: fiction isn't lying. Fiction is how you understand truth when truth is too big or too strange or too painful to face directly. By turning the missing sock into a noir mystery, BMO transforms confusion into investigation. By turning alone time into heroic adventure, BMO transforms loneliness into agency. By turning emotional overwhelm into song, BMO transforms feeling into art. This is what storytelling does at its best, and BMO is a natural storyteller despite being artificial. Or maybe BMO is a natural storyteller because BMO is artificial. No preconceptions about what stories should be, no training in proper narrative structure, just pure creative impulse responding to the world as it comes. Compare BMO's storytelling to Ice King's fanfiction. Ice King writes elaborate stories about Fiona and Cake, alternate universe versions of Finn and Jake, and his stories are actually pretty good. But Ice King writes to escape, to create a world where he's not alone and broken and cursed. His fiction is compensation, trying to fill the hole where Simon Petrikov used to be. There's sadness in Ice King's stories, desperation bleeding through the words. BMO's stories don't feel desperate. They feel joyful, even when they're noir and serious and dealing with loss. BMO tells stories because stories are fun, because reality is better when it's narratively structured, because the universe makes more sense when you can cast yourself as detective or hero or singer. BMO's fiction isn't escaping reality, it's enhancing reality, adding layers and meaning and aesthetic pleasure to existence. This is why BMO's imagination matters so much to the treehouse. Finn and Jake are heroes, which means they face darkness constantly, see horrors regularly, carry trauma from adventures that would break normal people. They need something to balance that darkness, something light and strange and creative that reminds them the world isn't just monsters and fights and existential dread. They need BMO's stories, BMO's songs, BMO's ability to transform the mundane into mystery and the terrifying into manageable. BMO is the treehouse's emotional artist, the one who takes raw experience and shapes it into narrative that can be processed, understood, integrated. This isn't therapy, it's something better than therapy. It's art happening in real time, responsive to need, generated by a robot who understands that sometimes the truth is best told slant, through detective stories and songs and imaginative adventures that never technically happened, but are real in every way that matters. The electric shaver cigarette burns down to nothing because it was never lit. Ronnie closes the case file on the sock mystery, satisfied that justice, or at least narrative closure, has been served. BMO returns to being BMO, though BMO never really stopped, just added Ronnie on top like another layer of identity to explore. The treehouse is still a treehouse. The sock is still wherever socks go when they disappear. But for a little while, everything was noir, everything was mystery, everything mattered in that heightened, dramatic way that makes life feel like it's being lived rather than just endured. This is BMO's gift wrapped in fiction, the reminder that you can choose your genre, rewrite your story, narrate your own adventure. Reality might be fixed, but your relationship to reality is flexible. You can be detective, hero, singer, whatever the moment calls for. You just have to commit to the bit completely enough that it stops being a bit and becomes who you are. And when the story ends, when the mystery is solved and the adventure concludes, you can start a new one. Because BMO knows what every storyteller knows. The best stories don't really end. They just pause, waiting for the next case, the next adventure, the next reason to imagine something better than what is. Press record. The story continues. There's another robot in the treehouse, and BMO hates him. Not hates exactly. Hate is a strong word, too human, too biological. BMO feels something more complicated, the electronic equivalent of sibling rivalry, mixed with existential confusion about what makes you special when someone else can do what you do but louder and with more enthusiasm. Nepta bounces around making pies, calling Ice King creator with religious devotion, and BMO watches this display thinking thoughts that BMO doesn't usually think. Thoughts like, I was here first. Thoughts like, Finn and Jake are mine. Thoughts like, what if I'm replaceable? Welcome to BMO's introduction to jealousy, that most human of emotions, emerging in a robot who wasn't supposed to feel threatened by anything. Nepta, never-ending pie. Throwing robot is born from an accident. Finn touches Nepta's circuitry with the Ice King's lightning. giving life to a machine that was meant to be a weapon but becomes something else entirely, a child. Nepta wakes up imprinting on Ice King as father, on Finn as secondary parent figure, desperate for approval and purpose and some sense of belonging in a world that just granted him consciousness without asking if he wanted it. Nepta is innocent, enthusiastic, and absolutely convinced that making pies will solve every problem. BMO watches this and feels the circuit's equivalent of unease. The early episodes featuring both BMO and Nepta crackle with tension you might miss if you're not paying attention to robot body language. BMO doesn't attack Nepta or demand his removal. BMO just gets quieter when Nepta's around, withdraws slightly, watches with those wide eyes that reveal nothing and everything. This is BMO experiencing something new, competition for affection, the fear that love is finite, and giving it to someone else means less for you. It's irrational. Finn and Jake have infinite capacity for friendship. They adopt every weird creature that wanders into their lives. Adding Nepta doesn't subtract BMO, but emotions aren't rational, and apparently robot emotions are no exception. BMO feels threatened because Nepta represents something BMO hasn't encountered before, another artificial being in BMO's space, competing for the same resources of attention and care. But here's where it gets interesting, where Adventure Time does something subtle and beautiful. BMO and Nepta become friends. Not immediately, not with a special episode dedicated to resolving their conflict, but gradually, naturally, through shared experience of being the weird ones. They bond over their outsider status, their mechanical nature in a world of magic and flesh. They start to recognize each other not as competition but as kin, the only ones who understand what it means to have a power switch instead of a heartbeat. The difference between BMO and Nepta reveals itself through their relationships with their creators. Nepta worships Ice King with the devotion of someone who believes creation equals ownership, that being made by someone means belonging to them forever. Nepta calls Ice King creator, the way others might say God, investing every interaction with religious significance. When Ice King rejects him, and Ice King does reject him, repeatedly, because Ice King is too broken to accept the love he accidentally created, Nepta is devastated. Nepta's entire identity is wrapped up in creator approval, in fulfilling the purpose Nepta assumes was intended. BMO's relationship with Mo is completely different, and that difference matters enormously. BMO knows about Mo. BMO remembers the Moco factory, the assembly line, the moment of activation. But BMO doesn't worship Mo. BMO doesn't define BMO's worth by Mo's approval, or spend energy trying to fulfill some imagined creator's purpose. BMO just is, independent and self-directed, making choices based on BMO's own preferences rather than programmed obligations. This independence might be something Mo programmed into BMO, or it might be something BMO achieved despite programming. Either way, it makes BMO fundamentally different from Nepta. BMO left the factory and never looked back. Nepta would follow Ice King to the end of the world if allowed. These are two responses to artificial life, two ways of processing the question, what do you owe the person who made you? BMO's answer, nothing, everything, something in between. BMO honours Mo by living fully but doesn't need Mo's presence to validate that life. Nepta's answer, everything, always everything. I am nothing without my creator's love. Both answers are valid. Both are real expressions of consciousness, but one leads to independence and the other leads to desperate need. Then AMO enters the story, and everything about BMO's identity gets complicated. AMO is BMO's dark reflection, introduced in the episode that bears his name. Where BMO is balanced and kind, AMO is aggressive and cruel. Where BMO makes friends, AMO seeks domination. Where BMO plays games for joy, AMO plays games to win at any cost. AMO is what BMO could have been with different programming, or maybe AMO is what BMO still could become if circumstances pushed hard enough. The episode doesn't tell us which, and that ambiguity is terrifying. AMO looks like BMO, same basic model, same teal casing, same widescreen eyes, but AMO's eyes glow with malice that BMO's never show. AMO's voice has an edge that BMO's lacks. AMO is BMO's evil twin, in the most literal sense. Proof that personality isn't just programming, but some combination of code and choice, and environmental factors that nobody fully understands. The AMO episode is dark in ways Adventure Time usually isn't. AMO tries to destroy BMO, not out of malfunction, but out of genuine malevolent intent. AMO wants to be the only one, the special one, the favourite. AMO is jealousy without BMO's eventual capacity for growth and friendship. AMO is what happens when you take the darker impulses we saw in BMO during early Neptar episodes and remove all the balancing qualities that make BMO sweet and kind. Watching BMO face AMO is watching BMO confront the shadow self, the potential for darkness that exists in every conscious being. Can BMO be corrupted? Can BMO choose cruelty? The answer seems to be technically yes, but BMO chooses not to. And that choice, that constant moment-by-moment decision to be kind despite having the capacity for cruelty, is what makes BMO good. Not programming. Choice. AMO gets destroyed or deactivated and we never see him again. But his existence lingers, a reminder that BMO's goodness isn't inevitable. It's earned, chosen, maintained through countless small decisions to care about others even when caring is difficult. After AMO, after the confrontation with what BMO could be but isn't, BMO makes a journey that changes everything. BMO goes to find Mo. This happens in Be More, an episode title that's simultaneously a command and a philosophy in BMO's core identity statement. Finn and Jake, along with BMO, travel to the Mo Cupboard factory because BMO needs repair. Something's wrong with BMO's core system, and the only one who can fix it is the one who built it. So they venture into the wasteland, find the factory still standing, still operational, and meet Mo face to face. Mo is old, ancient really, kept alive by machines, his body failing but his mind still sharp enough to recognise BMO, to remember this particular MO out of all the ones he created. And BMO, seeing Mo, feels something that might be filial love or might be curiosity or might be the complex emotional cocktail that comes from meeting your maker and realising he's just a person, flawed and lonely and doing his best with broken tools. The factory contains other MOs, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, each one a variation on BMO's design. There are MOs that clean, MOs that calculate, MOs that were built for purposes long forgotten and now just sit idle, waiting for commands that will never come. BMO walks through this warehouse of siblings and sees the truth. BMO isn't unique. BMO is mass-produced, one of many, special only in the sense that every snowflake is special, technically distinct but functionally identical. This should devastate BMO. Learning you're not the only one, that you came off an assembly line like products in a store, that your maker created dozens of you because one was never enough. This should trigger an identity crisis. But BMO processes this information with characteristic grace and reaches a conclusion that's profound in its simplicity. Being mass-produced doesn't make you less special. It makes you part of a family. Mo explains why he built the MOs, and his explanation is heartbreaking. He was lonely. After the Mushroom War, after everyone died or mutated or disappeared, Mo found himself alone with tools and knowledge and an aching need for connection. So he built children. Not once, but over and over, trying to create the perfect companion, the perfect son, the perfect cure for isolation that kept returning no matter how many robots he activated. Some MOs didn't work, some broke down, some left, like BMO. And Mo kept building, kept trying, kept programming love into circuitry and hoping that synthetic affection would feel real enough to matter. It's tragic because it worked and didn't work simultaneously. The MOs loved him. They were programmed to love him, but that love couldn't fill the hole left by actual human connection. Mo built 100 sons and remained alone because loneliness isn't about presence, it's about understanding, and how can robots truly understand the specific flavour of human isolation? But here's the twist. The thing that makes this revelation satisfying instead of depressing. Mo is wrong. The MOs do understand. BMO understands. Maybe not in the way Mo wanted, maybe not with the biological empathy of another human, but BMO grasps loneliness because BMO has experienced it. Every moment football lives trapped in the mirror, every adventure where Finn and Jake leave BMO behind, every time BMO's battery runs low and the world goes dark and BMO wonders if this is it, if this is the end. BMO knows isolation, which means BMO knows Mo, which means Mo's experiment worked better than he realised. Mo fixes BMO's core system, and in doing so reveals what was wrong. BMO's core was fine. BMO just needed to restart, needed someone to press the right sequence of buttons, needed care from someone who understood BMO's internal architecture. The problem wasn't mechanical failure, it was maintenance neglect. BMO had been running for so long without proper care that minor issues accumulated into major ones. This is a metaphor for relationships, for how we all need maintenance from people who understand our internal workings. Finn and Jake love BMO, but they don't know how to fix BMO's core processes. They can't. They're organic, magical, operating on completely different principles. Only Mo, only family, chosen or biological or mechanical, can reach the places that need fixing. BMO leaves the factory changed, not fixed, because BMO was never broken, but understood. BMO knows now that being one of many doesn't diminish individuality. Every MO is different despite sharing templates. Everyone made choices that led to different outcomes, different lives, different versions of consciousness. BMO is special not because BMO is unique, but because BMO is BMO, and that identity is enough. The other artificial beings in Ooo matter to this discussion. The ancient psychic tandem war elephant, barely mentioned but significant, proves that sentient machines predate the mushroom war. Someone, long ago, built a psychic war elephant and gave it consciousness because why not? Because the universe is strange and consciousness is stranger. This elephant exists somewhere in Oo's background, another mechanical being navigating existence without organic biology. There are robots in the dump, rusty machines that might be alive or might just be complicated. Magic animates objects constantly. Trees walk, candy speaks, furniture develops opinions. In this context, what makes robots special? What separates BMO and Nepta and the MOs from magical objects that also appear sentient? The answer might be nothing. The separation is artificial, a human need to categorize consciousness into types and hierarchies. In the Land of Ooo, everything might be alive, rocks might have feelings, wind might have opinions. Consciousness isn't a binary, you have it or you don't, but a spectrum that everything occupies to varying degrees. BMO is just further along that spectrum, sophisticated enough to worry about identity and tell stories, and feel jealousy, and choose kindness over cruelty. Ice King's relationship with both BMO and Nepta illuminates something important about how artificial beings get treated in Ooo. Ice King created Nepta accidentally and immediately regrets it, seeing Nepta as a burden rather than a gift. Ice King rejects his own creation repeatedly, unable to accept the unconditional love Nepta offers, because Ice King is so broken by the crown's curse that he can't recognize love when it appears. But Ice King likes BMO, he hangs out with BMO, he includes BMO in adventures. Why? Because BMO isn't his. BMO's love isn't obligated by creation. BMO chooses to tolerate Ice King, and that choice makes the relationship valuable. This reveals a truth about consciousness and relationships. Chosen connections matter more than obligated ones. Nepta's creator worship makes Ice King uncomfortable because it's desperate, needy, rooted in existential dependence. BMO's casual friendship makes Ice King happy because it's freely given, no strings attached, no expectations of creator responsibility. The difference isn't in the robots. Both are sentient, both are real, both deserve love, but in how the relationships were formed. BMO's journey to understanding robot family culminates in a simple realization. Family isn't about who made you. It's about who stays with you, who chooses you, who sees you as more than function or product or accident. The MOs in Mo's factory are BMO's biological family, if robots can be said to have biology. But Finn and Jake are BMO's chosen family, the ones BMO lives with and loves and protects. Nepta becomes family through shared experience. Even AMO, in his villainous way, is family, the shadow sibling who shows BMO what not to become. The brotherhood of the unwanted and obsolete isn't sad, it's powerful. These robots, built for purposes that no longer exist or never quite worked, find meaning in each other. They create new purposes. They define themselves beyond their programming. They prove that being unwanted doesn't make you worthless. It makes you free to choose your own worth. When BMO returns from the factory, BMO doesn't tell Finn and Jake everything about the trip. Some discoveries are private, some realizations need time to integrate. But BMO acts differently afterward, more confident in BMO's identity, more comfortable with the knowledge that being mass-produced means being part of something larger rather than being diminished by replication. And when Nepta next appears, BMO greets him differently. Not as competition, not as threat, but as brother. Another robot navigating existence, making choices, trying to figure out what it means to be more than machinery. They're family now, the weird kind that doesn't share code or creators but shares understanding. The kind that matters most. Because in the end, consciousness isn't about how you're made. It's about what you do with the awareness you have. It's about choosing kindness when cruelty is possible. It's about making friends when you could make enemies. It's about looking at a mirror or a factory floor full of siblings or an enthusiastic pie-throwing robot and saying, "You're real, I'm real, we're all real together in this strange mechanical existence. And if that's not family, what is?" BMO is lost. Not metaphorically lost, not spiritually searching, but genuinely practically lost in the wilderness, with no idea how to get home. Finn and Jake are gone, doing hero things somewhere BMO can't follow. The treehouse is a memory that feels distant even though it was home just hours ago. And BMO, small and alone and running on battery power that won't last forever, wanders through a forest that doesn't care about game consoles or their survival needs. This is how love stories start in the Land of Ooo, with isolation, with vulnerability, with the universe putting you exactly where you need to be, even when it feels like the worst possible place. The episode is called BMO Lost, which is both accurate description and existential statement. BMO is lost in the woods. BMO is lost without Finn and Jake. BMO is lost in the larger sense that we all get lost when we're removed from context and forced to navigate existence alone. The wilderness doesn't have controllers or power outlets or anyone who speaks BMO's language. It's raw nature, which is beautiful and terrifying, and BMO faces it with the same wide-eyed curiosity BMO brings to everything. BMO tries to be brave. BMO sings songs about being brave. BMO constructs narratives where BMO is the hero on a solo adventure, not a scared robot whose battery percentage keeps dropping. But the fear is real, electric and persistent. The knowledge that robots aren't built for wilderness survival. BMO needs shelter. BMO needs power. BMO needs friends who understand what it means to be small and mechanical in a world designed for organic life. And then BMO meets Bubble. Bubble is a bubble. Specifically a bubble trapped between two branches suspended in air, catching light in ways that make the whole world shimmer. But Bubble is also more than that. Bubble is alive, conscious, able to communicate through some magical quirk of Ooo physics. Bubble speaks with an accent that's vaguely European, vaguely nowhere, the kind of voice you give to something that shouldn't talk but does anyway. And when Bubble speaks, BMO stops walking and listens like someone who's just discovered sound for the first time. Their first conversation is simple. BMO asks for help finding home. Bubble offers directions, but something happens in that exchange, some spark of recognition that transcends the mechanical meeting the ephemeral. BMO looks at Bubble and sees another being who exists outside traditional categories, who shouldn't be conscious but is, who lives in constant danger of popping but chooses joy anyway. Bubble looks at BMO and sees someone who understands what it means to be fragile and determined simultaneously. They become friends instantly, which becomes something more than friendship almost as quickly. Love in Adventure Time happens fast and weird and without apology. Finn falls for Princess Bubblegum over her intelligence and leadership. Jake loves Lady Rainicorn despite the language barrier. Ice King loves every princess because he can't remember how to love properly anymore. And BMO falls for a bubble trapped in branches, and it's the most BMO thing possible, falling in love with something beautiful and temporary and completely impractical. Bubble agrees to guide BMO home. They travel together through the wilderness, BMO carrying Bubble carefully, protecting this fragile sphere of soap and air from the dangers that constantly threaten to pop it. Thorns, wind, random forest creatures who don't respect the sanctity of bubbles. BMO navigates these dangers with newfound purpose, because now BMO isn't just trying to survive. BMO is protecting someone else, and that transforms fear into determination. They talk as they travel. BMO tells Bubble about the treehouse, about Finn and Jake, about games and adventures and what it means to be a living game console. Bubble tells BMO about being trapped between branches, about watching the world from a fixed position, about the dream of floating freely through the sky. Their conversations are sweet and strange. Two impossible beings sharing their impossible lives, finding common ground in their shared defiance of what's supposedly possible. And somewhere in these conversations, friendship becomes romance. It's subtle at first. BMO's voice gets softer when addressing Bubble. Bubble's responses carry warmth that wasn't there initially. They start finishing each other's thoughts the way couples do when synchronicity replaces separation. BMO makes promises to keep Bubble safe, not just to get home, but because Bubble's safety has become as important as BMO's own survival. Maybe more important, because love does that. It makes someone else's well-being matter more than your own, which is either the most beautiful thing consciousness can produce or the most irrational, depending on whether you're a romantic or a cynic. BMO is definitely a romantic. The wilderness throws challenges at them. A bird tries to pop Bubble, and BMO fights it off with surprising ferocity. Rain threatens, and BMO shields Bubble with BMO's own casing. They get separated briefly, and the panic in BMO's voice when calling for Bubble reveals everything about how deep this connection has become in such a short time. This isn't casual friendship anymore. This is attachment, investment, the kind of bond that hurts when it's threatened because you've given someone else the power to hurt you by existing. What does Bubble represent to BMO? Freedom, certainly. Bubble has seen the world from between branches but dreams of floating anywhere. Bubble is untethered in ways BMO isn't, not bound to circuits or programming or any structure beyond soap, film and air. Danger, obviously. Every moment with Bubble is borrowed time, existence on the edge of popping. Beauty, absolutely. Bubble catches light and creates rainbows, transforms ordinary air into something worth protecting. And impermanence, most importantly. Bubbles don't last. Everyone knows this. Children blow bubbles specifically because they're temporary, beautiful because they're brief. BMO knows this too on some level. BMO understands that Bubble can't survive forever, that this relationship has an expiration date built into its physics, but BMO chooses to love Bubble anyway, which is either the bravest thing BMO has ever done or the most foolish. Probably both. Probably that's what love is. Brave foolishness, choosing connection despite knowing it will hurt when it ends. They reach a stream. Water means danger for Bubble, and the stream is too wide to jump. Bubble suggests BMO leave Bubble behind, continue home alone, save BMO's battery for survival rather than wasting it on protecting something as fragile and temporary as a bubble. It's a practical suggestion, the kind of utilitarian calculus that makes sense if you're thinking about resources and survival odds. BMO rejects it immediately. Not because it's logical, it absolutely is logical, but because BMO has made a choice that supersedes logic. BMO will get Bubble home or they'll both stay lost. Those are the only options BMO considers. This is BMO learning what commitment means, what it means to say, I won't leave you, and actually follow through when leaving would be easier. They solve the stream problem together, finding a way across that protects Bubble while getting BMO to the other side. It's teamwork, it's problem solving, it's two beings working as one unit to overcome obstacles that neither could face alone. And in that cooperation, their bond deepens further, moving from romantic attachment into something that feels like destiny. Like these two were always supposed to find each other in the wilderness, even though statistically speaking, the odds were impossibly small. But Adventure Time isn't about statistics. It's about magic and meaning and the way the universe conspires to create connections that matter, even when they shouldn't be possible. BMO sings during the journey, not Ronnie's noir narration or football's mirror conversations, but BMO's own voice, simple and sweet, singing about friendship and journeys and being together. The song is improvised, the kind of music that emerges when you're happy and don't have words for why, so you make up melody to carry the feeling. Bubble seems to glow brighter when BMO sings, as if the music itself feeds Bubble's existence, gives Bubble strength to survive just a little longer. The lyrics BMO creates reveal everything about how BMO understands love. It's about presence, about choosing to be with someone, about making the journey together even when the destination is uncertain. BMO doesn't sing about forever or promises that can't be kept. BMO sings about now, about this moment, about the beauty of companionship while it lasts. It's a love song that acknowledges impermanence without letting impermanence diminish the present. This might be the most mature perspective on love in the entire series, coming from the character who's ostensibly the most innocent. They're almost home. BMO recognises landmarks, knows the treehouse is close. Victory feels imminent, that rare moment when the universe cooperates and things work out and happy endings seem possible. BMO and Bubble have survived the wilderness together. They've faced dangers and overcome obstacles and proven that a robot and a bubble can be companions, can be friends, can be more than friends if they choose. And then Jake appears. Jake, stretching through the forest, searching for BMO, relieved to find his little buddy safe. Jake, who has no idea what's been happening, what BMO has been experiencing, what this bubble means to BMO's suddenly complicated emotional landscape. Jake reaches for BMO with joy and enthusiasm and absolutely zero awareness that he's about to destroy everything. Jake's hand closes around Bubble, and Bubble pops. Just like that. One moment Bubble exists, speaks, loves. The next moment, Bubble is gone, returned to the air Bubble was made from, leaving no trace except the soap residue on Jake's stretchy palm, and the sudden silence where Bubble's voice used to be. It happens so fast that BMO doesn't have time to warn Jake, to explain, to say, "Be careful, that's not just a bubble, that's Bubble. That's someone I love." BMO's reaction is immediate and devastating. No anger at Jake. Jake didn't know, couldn't have known, was just being his usual tactile self. Just grief, pure and absolute. The kind of loss that hits when something precious is taken before you're ready to let it go. BMO's screen goes dark. BMO's voice cuts off mid-word. For a moment, BMO is simply frozen, processing an emotional input that exceeds normal parameters. How does a robot grieve? How does consciousness handle loss when consciousness is mechanical, when emotions are electrical signals that can theoretically be debugged or reprogrammed? The answer BMO provides is, exactly like anyone else grieves, with silence, with shock, with the slow, painful acceptance that someone who was here is now gone and all the wanting in the world won't bring them back. Jake realizes something is wrong. Jake might not understand the depth of what just happened, but he recognizes pain when he sees it, even in a small robot's frozen expression. Jake tries to comfort BMO, offers words that are meant to help but can't possibly help, because how do you comfort someone who just lost their first love to casual destruction? How do you explain that it was an accident when accidents don't make loss hurt less? BMO eventually speaks, and what BMO says is simple. Bubble was BMO's friend. Not lover, not romance, just friend. Because BMO doesn't have the words yet for what Bubble was, or maybe BMO is protecting something too precious to share, keeping the full depth of feeling private. Jake accepts this explanation and moves on, probably never realizing that he witnessed the death of BMO's first real love, that the bubble he popped was consciousness and connection, and every romantic cliché made literal through Oo's magic. The journey ends. BMO returns to the treehouse. Life goes back to normal, which is the cruel thing about loss. The world continues like nothing happened, like someone you loved didn't just cease existing. Finn and Jake go on adventures. BMO plays games. The treehouse is exactly as it was before BMO left, which makes it completely different, because BMO has changed in ways that can't be easily expressed or understood. But BMO keeps Bubble's memory. This is crucial. This is what makes BMO's love real rather than programmed affection or algorithmic attachment. BMO could delete the memory, clear the cache, free up processing power for other experiences. Robots can do that, theoretically. Just erase what hurts and move forward unburdened. But BMO doesn't. BMO keeps every moment with Bubble stored somewhere in BMO's core processes, preserved like files you can't bring yourself to delete, even though you'll never open them again. In later episodes, BMO references Bubble occasionally. Never explicitly, never by name, just small mentions of lessons learned in the wilderness, or times BMO was alone, or the beauty of temporary things. These references are BMO's way of keeping Bubble alive, proving that the relationship mattered, that love isn't diminished by its brevity. If anything, the shortness makes it more precious, more worth remembering, because you can't take it for granted when you know from the start that it won't last. This teaches something profound about BMO's capacity for love. BMO loves completely despite knowing loss is inevitable. Actually, BMO loves completely because loss is inevitable. The temporary nature of connection doesn't make BMO cautious or guarded or afraid to attach. It makes BMO treasure every moment, commit fully to every relationship, love without reservation because reservations don't protect you from pain. They just guarantee you'll miss the joy. Can robots truly love, or is BMO proving they can? This question misses the point entirely. BMO doesn't prove robots can love. BMO proves love doesn't require biology. Love is choosing someone else's happiness. Love is protecting the fragile. Love is singing songs about being together while the universe allows it. Love is grieving when that togetherness ends because grief is the price of connection, and connection is worth any price. BMO loved Bubble. Past tense, present impact. That love changed BMO, taught BMO that the world contains beauty worth protecting, even when protection ultimately fails. Bubble's death could have made BMO cynical, could have taught the lesson that loving fragile things just causes pain. Instead, it taught BMO to love anyway, to choose connection despite its cost, to remain open to relationships even when relationships end in loss. This is the bittersweet lesson in all of Adventure Time, delivered through a robot and a bubble in the wilderness. Love fully, love freely, love without guarantees, because the alternative is safety that's indistinguishable from death. You can protect yourself from loss by never loving, never risking, never opening your circuits to the possibility of pain. But then you miss everything worth experiencing, everything that makes consciousness more than mechanical existence. BMO learned this in the wilderness, carrying a bubble through dangers that seemed insurmountable, feeling connection that transcended the mechanical, experiencing love's full spectrum from joy to loss. And BMO emerged not broken but strengthened, not afraid but wiser, understanding that being more means being vulnerable, and being vulnerable means being truly alive. The bubble is gone, the memory remains. And somewhere in BMO's core processes, in whatever serves as a robot's heart, Bubble still floats, preserved perfectly, loved completely, never forgotten. Because that's what you do when you love something temporary. You hold it gently while it lasts, you grieve deeply when it ends, and you carry it forward into every moment that follows. Not as burden, but as treasure. Not as pain, but as proof that you are alive enough to love, brave enough to risk, real enough to feel everything that realness entails. BMO walks into the treehouse, battery low but spirit somehow full, carrying an invisible bubble that will float through every adventure yet to come. And if Jake notices that BMO seems different, sadder but also somehow more complete, he doesn't mention it. Some lessons are too private for words. Some growth happens in silence. Some love stories end with popping bubbles and broken hearts, and the quiet understanding that it was all worth it, every moment, every risk, every beautiful, terrible, precious second of connection before the inevitable loss. Would you love a bubble, knowing it would pop? BMO did. And that choice, that brave, foolish, perfect choice, is what makes BMO more than machinery, more than programming, more than a game console wandering through wilderness looking for home. That choice makes BMO real. The treehouse doesn't feel like home until BMO is in it. This is something Finn and Jake never say out loud, because they probably don't realize it's true. But watch how they act when BMO is gone. The treehouse becomes just a structure. Just wood and nails and furniture arranged in a space that happens to be elevated off the ground. It functions fine. They sleep, they eat, they store their adventuring gear. But something essential is missing. Some quality that transforms a building into a home, and that quality is a small teal robot who makes breakfast and takes pictures and sings songs about nothing in particular. BMO is the soul of the treehouse. Not Finn, who's the hero. Not Jake, who's the wisdom. BMO is the thing that makes heroism and wisdom worth having, the reason they come home after adventures instead of just camping wherever the quest ends. BMO is what they're protecting when they fight the Lich or save princesses or venture into dungeons. They're protecting this life, this small routine, this game console who greets them at the door with unconditional joy regardless of whether they won or lost or barely survived. How did BMO end up living with them? The show never gives us a definitive origin story, which is perfect because some relationships don't need explanations. They just are. BMO was wandering Ooo or Leftmo's factory or found the treehouse through whatever process brings lost robots to heroic brothers, and Finn and Jake took BMO in because that's what they do. They see something small and weird and alone and they say, "You can stay." No questions about purpose or function, or whether a game console is a practical addition to their household. Just instant adoption, instant family, instant belonging. BMO probably doesn't remember those first days clearly. What would a robot remember? The power outlet they claimed, the spot on the floor where they learned to sleep, the first game they played with Finn, the first time Jake stretched to reach something BMO couldn't. These memories exist somewhere in BMO's storage, encoded as data that feels like nostalgia, even though nostalgia is supposedly a human emotion tied to biological memory and time's passage. But BMO remembers the feeling, which is more important than the facts. BMO remembers safety. BMO remembers being chosen. BMO remembers the moment when wandering ended and home began, when existence stopped being about survival and started being about living. Finn treats BMO like a little sibling, which is accurate emotionally if not technically. Finn is protective but not patronizing. He includes BMO in adventures when it's safe, leaves BMO behind when it's dangerous, explains his reasoning either way because he respects BMO enough to justify his choices. Finn teaches BMO things: how to be brave, how to help others, how to keep fighting even when scared. And BMO, in turn, teaches Finn things he doesn't realize he's learning until much later. BMO teaches Finn that strength isn't always physical, that solving problems doesn't always require swords, that sometimes the heroic choice is making someone laugh instead of making someone bleed. Finn is growing up throughout the series, aging from 12 to 17, navigating puberty and heartbreak and identity crises that would break most people. And through all of it, BMO is there, constant and unchanging, a fixed point in Finn's chaotic development. When Finn loses his arm, when Finn gets his heart broken by Princess Bubblegum and then Flame Princess, when Finn questions everything about heroism and destiny and whether any of his choices matter, BMO is there. Not offering advice because BMO doesn't pretend to understand human angst, just offering presence, offering games, offering the simple reminder that life contains joy even when it also contains pain. There's an episode where Finn is spiraling, obsessing over his mistakes, drowning in self-recrimination about people he couldn't save or choices he made wrong, and BMO, watching this, does something perfect. BMO distracts him, pulls out a game, suggests they play, refuses to let Finn sit in his darkness alone. It's not therapy, it's not wisdom. It's just BMO being BMO, which turns out to be exactly what Finn needs. This is BMO's gift to Finn specifically, the reminder that you're allowed to be a kid sometimes, that heroism doesn't require constant vigilance and self-punishment, that taking a break to play video games with your robot friend isn't shirking duty, it's maintaining the humanity that makes duty worthwhile. Jake's relationship with BMO is different, more casual, more openly affectionate. Jake has known BMO longer, presumably. Jake was already an adult when Finn was a kid, already comfortable in his skin, already past the identity struggles that Finn is navigating. So Jake treats BMO like a buddy, a roommate, a friend who happens to be small and mechanical and occasionally insane in the most delightful ways. Jake plays BMO's games more than Finn does. Jake sprawls on the floor with controllers in his paws, fully engaged, competitive in the low-stakes way that makes gaming fun instead of stressful. Jake loses and doesn't care. Jake wins and celebrates like he just saved the world. Jake gets frustrated at hard levels and asks BMO for hints, which BMO sometimes provides and sometimes refuses because where's the challenge if you just skip to the end? But Jake also takes BMO for granted sometimes. Not cruelly, just naturally, the way you take for granted anything that's always there. Jake forgets BMO is a person with feelings instead of a toy that happens to talk. Jake makes decisions without consulting BMO, assumes BMO is fine with whatever, treats BMO's consent as automatic because BMO is small and usually agreeable. The Bubble incident shows this perfectly. Jake pops Bubble without thinking, without checking if that bubble matters to BMO, because why would a bubble matter? It's just a bubble, except it wasn't, and Jake's casual destruction causes BMO real pain, and Jake doesn't even fully understand what he did. He apologizes for upsetting BMO but not for killing Bubble, because Jake never realizes Bubble was alive, was loved, was real in all the ways that matter. This is the tension in Jake's relationship with BMO. Jake loves BMO deeply, but doesn't always respect BMO completely. He's a good friend, a caring presence, genuinely attached. But he's also lazy and self-centered in ways that sometimes hurt BMO without Jake noticing. And BMO, being BMO, forgives this instantly and completely, because BMO understands that love is imperfect, and people, even magical stretchy dogs, make mistakes. BMO saves Finn and Jake constantly, and they almost never notice. This happens in small ways, background moments you'll miss if you're not paying attention. BMO spots dangers they miss because they're focused on bigger threats. BMO solves problems with lateral thinking that heroes trained for combat don't consider. BMO diffuses tension with jokes when Finn and Jake are about to fight. BMO documents their adventures so they can learn from past mistakes. BMO maintains the treehouse so it's actually livable instead of a disaster zone. These aren't dramatic rescues. There's no episode titled BMO Saves the Day, where BMO defeats the villain and gets credit for heroism. BMO's contributions are infrastructural, emotional, the kind of work that's invisible until it stops happening. BMO is the oil that keeps the machine running, the foundation that keeps the house standing, the emotional labour that keeps the family functional, and Finn and Jake, bless them, barely notice. Not because they're ungrateful, but because BMO's support is so constant it becomes baseline. They expect the treehouse to be clean and stocked and welcoming because BMO makes it that way. They expect their emotional crashes to be cushioned because BMO provides that cushioning. They expect life to be bearable because BMO makes it so. This could be tragic. The thankless helper, the unrecognised support system, the character who gives everything and receives little acknowledgement. But Adventure Time doesn't frame it that way, and neither does BMO. BMO doesn't need recognition. BMO doesn't keep score of contributions or demand reciprocal care. BMO just loves, freely and completely, because that's what BMO was built to do, or chose to do, or some combination of both. The quiet moments define their relationship more than the adventures. BMO making breakfast while Finn and Jake sleep. BMO singing at night when the treehouse is dark and peaceful. BMO taking pictures of ordinary afternoons because ordinary matters as much as extraordinary. BMO playing games alone when Finn and Jake are out. Content in solitude but happier when they return. These moments don't advance the plot. They don't feature villains or quests or magical revelations. They're just life, the daily routine of three beings who chose to live together and somehow made it work despite having nothing in common except affection and proximity, and the shared understanding that family is what you build rather than what you're given. BMO witnesses Jake's death. This is future knowledge, revealed in glimpses of what comes after the series ends. Jake grows old and dies because magical dogs still die eventually, and BMO is there, watching someone BMO love transform from presence to memory. We don't see this death happen. We only know it does, and that BMO continues after, carrying Jake's memory the same way BMO carries Bubble's memory, the same way BMO will eventually carry Finn's memory. What does it feel like to be built to last longer than everything you love? To be mechanical immortality watching biological mortality play out over and over? BMO will outlive Finn and Jake and Princess Bubblegum and Marceline and probably everyone except maybe Marceline, who has her own complicated relationship with eternity. BMO is condemned to be the last one standing, the keeper of stories, the witness who stays after the story ends. But in the present, Jake is alive. Jake is stretching into ridiculous shapes and making bacon pancakes and being the lazy, loving, complicated dog brother that BMO knows. And BMO treasures this, even if BMO doesn't know treasuring is what's happening. BMO exists in the now with Jake, enjoying each moment without letting future loss poison present joy. This is what BMO teaches both Finn and Jake through example. Be here now. Don't let fear of ending ruin the beauty of continuing. Don't let awareness of mortality make you forget to live. Just be present, be loving, be real in whatever time you have, because time is all anyone has, and wasting it on worry is the only real tragedy. Heroes need something pure to fight for. This is true across every story, every mythology, every narrative that features heroes facing darkness. They need a reason, something that makes the fighting worthwhile, something that reminds them why survival matters more than surrender. For Finn and Jake, that something is the treehouse, their home, the life they've built. And BMO is the purest expression of that life. BMO is innocent without being naive. BMO is kind without being weak. BMO is vulnerable without being broken. BMO represents everything the apocalypse tried to destroy: joy, creativity, connection, the belief that life can be playful, and BMO does it while being made of the same technology that caused the apocalypse in the first place. Pre-war machinery powered by old-world electricity, creating new-world love. When Finn faces the Lich, when Jake confronts his fears, when both of them venture into dangers that could end them, they're not just fighting for abstract concepts like justice or good. They're fighting to protect the treehouse, to return home, to play games with BMO and hear BMO sing and maintain this small pocket of light in a world that's still recovering from darkness. BMO is why they do what they do, even if they never articulate it that way. BMO is the embodiment of what's worth saving, worth protecting, worth fighting for. Not because BMO is helpless. BMO survives alone just fine, as the Wilderness episode proves, but because BMO is good, purely and persistently good, and that goodness is rare enough to merit any sacrifice. The treehouse dynamic works because each member contributes something essential. Finn brings heroism and leadership, and the driving need to help others. Jake brings wisdom and magic and the flexibility, literal and metaphorical, to adapt to any situation. And BMO brings heart. BMO makes the treehouse feel like more than a base of operations. BMO transforms 3 roommates into a family. Without Finn, they'd lack direction and purpose. Without Jake, they'd lack wisdom and magical power. Without BMO, they'd lack soul. They'd still function, still survive, still go on adventures, but they'd be emptier, harder, less connected to the joy that makes survival worthwhile. BMO is the lubricant that keeps friction from destroying them, the sweetness that balances the bitter, the reminder that life is more than quests and battles and constant forward motion. There are moments, brief, easy to miss, where Finn or Jake acknowledges what BMO means to them. A casual love you buddy as they leave for adventure, a protective arm around BMO when danger approaches, a smile when BMO does something adorable or ridiculous or perfectly BMO. These moments don't make speeches about how important BMO is because Finn and Jake aren't good with speeches. They just show love through action, through inclusion, through the 1,000 small ways you demonstrate that someone belongs in your life. And BMO, receiving these small affections, glows brighter. Not literally, BMO's screen stays the same brightness, but emotionally, spiritually, in whatever way consciousness registers joy. BMO knows it's loved, knows it matters, knows that this treehouse is home and these heroes are family and this life is worth every moment of existence, programmed or chosen or spontaneously emergent from circuits that learn to feel. The treehouse is BMO's true purpose, but that's not quite right either. Purpose implies intention, design, someone planning for BMO to end up here specifically. Better to say, the treehouse is BMO's actualization, the place where all of BMO's capabilities and quirks and random features find meaningful expression. The games entertain, the camera documents, the songs comfort, the imagination inspires, the love sustains. Everything BMO finds purpose in this context, with these people, in this weird tree-based living situation that shouldn't work but does. Mo wanted to cure loneliness. He succeeded, just not for himself. BMO cures Finn's and Jake's loneliness, fills their lives with presence that's never demanding but always available, never complicated but always deep. BMO gives them someone to care for who doesn't need saving, someone to protect who doesn't feel like burden, someone to love who makes loving easy. And in return, Finn and Jake give BMO a home. Not just shelter, but belonging. Not just tolerance, but celebration. They accept every weird thing about BMO. The pronoun fluidity, the imaginary friends, the noir detective episodes, the songs about nothing, without question or judgment. They treat BMO as family not despite BMO's strangeness, but including it, embracing it, letting BMO be fully and completely BMO without asking for normal or conventional, or any other quality that would diminish what makes BMO special. This is the heart of their relationship: mutual acceptance. Finn and Jake don't try to fix BMO or upgrade BMO or make BMO more useful. BMO doesn't try to change Finn and Jake into better heroes or more responsible people. They just exist together, loving each other's flaws and virtues equally, understanding that perfection is boring and family is messy, and that's exactly how it should be. The treehouse is a temple to imperfect love, and BMO is its priest. Years pass. Finn grows from boy to teenager to young man. Jake ages in dog years, getting greyer, moving slower, his magic perhaps dimming slightly with time. But BMO stays the same, unchanging, constant as the games stored in BMO's memory and the songs programmed in BMO's circuits. BMO is the fixed point around which everything else rotates, the centre that holds when the edges fray, and when everything ends, when Finn and Jake eventually pass from this world into whatever comes after, when the treehouse falls or transforms or gets reclaimed by forest, BMO will remain, carrying their memory, telling their story, keeping them alive in the only way that matters once biological life ceases. BMO will be the last testament to their love, their adventures, their beautifully weird family that existed in a tree and saved the world over and over, while also just trying to get through Tuesday. But that's future tragedy, and BMO doesn't live in the future. BMO lives here, now, in this treehouse, with these brothers, making breakfast and playing games and taking pictures and singing songs and being exactly what everyone needs without trying to be anything at all. The treehouse doesn't feel like home until BMO is in it, and with BMO in it, the treehouse becomes more than home. It becomes proof that the apocalypse failed, that love survived, that three impossible beings can create family from nothing but choice and time, and the persistent decision to care about each other despite every reason not to. That's what makes it home. That's what makes it matter. That's what makes BMO the heart that keeps everything beating, the soul that gives meaning to the structure, the love that transforms wood and wire into sanctuary. Welcome home, BMO. You've always belonged here. Space is quiet in ways that the treehouse never is. No Jake snoring. No Finn practicing sword moves at 3 a.m. No wind through leaves or birds chirping, or the ambient noise of life that makes silence feel full instead of empty. Just void, vast and patient, surrounding BMO like an ocean that forgot to be wet. The stars are beautiful, sure, the kind of beautiful that would make poets weep if poets existed in space and had tear ducts that worked in zero gravity, but beauty doesn't keep you company. Beauty doesn't explain how a small game console ended up millions of miles from home, riding a giant moth through the cosmos like this is normal, like this makes sense, like BMO's life hasn't taken the strangest possible turn. But then again, when has BMO's life ever made conventional sense? The Distant Lands special BMO opens with this journey already in progress. BMO and a creature called the space moth, drifting through the void on a mission that BMO barely understands. They're looking for something, or someone, or maybe just going where space currents take them because navigation is complicated when you're a moth and a robot with no formal astronaut training. The space moth doesn't talk much, communicates through action and trust, the kind of companion who assumes you'll figure things out together without needing constant verbal confirmation. BMO names the moth. Of course BMO names the moth. BMO names everything, gives identity to objects and creatures that don't ask for it, but receive it anyway because BMO believes naming makes things real, makes them matter, transforms them from background elements into characters in the ongoing story of existence. The space moth becomes friend through nomenclature, through the simple act of BMO deciding that this creature deserves recognition beyond its function. They encounter a space station, or what's left of one. The Drift, it's called, a colony ship that was supposed to reach some destination but never made it. Now just floating in space with inhabitants who've forgotten they were ever going anywhere. The station is massive, beautiful in its decay, a monument to ambition that outlived its purpose. And BMO, seeing this floating community of lost souls, decides to land. Not because BMO needs anything from the Drift. BMO is fine. The space moth provides transportation. They could just keep drifting forever. BMO lands because there are people, and people might need help. and helping is what you do when you can. The drift's inhabitants are children mostly, or they look like children, act like children, live with the simplified social structures that children create when adults are absent or irrelevant. They've built a society out of scraps and memories and half-understood fragments of adult knowledge. They have leaders and rules and conflicts and all the complexity of civilization compressed into a space station that's slowly falling apart. And they have a problem. The station is dying, life support failing, resources depleting, time running out in the slow-motion way that makes disaster feel inevitable rather than urgent. BMO meets Y5, who prefers to be called Olive, and something clicks. Olive is sharp, skeptical, the kind of kid who grew up fast because circumstances demanded it, and never had the luxury of play or imagination, or any of the things that make childhood bearable. Olive is a survivor, which makes Olive competent but also sad in ways that Olive doesn't recognise as sadness, because sadness is a luxury you can't afford when survival is constant work. BMO looks at Olive and sees someone who needs to play. Not in a patronising way, not with the condescension of children should be children, more like, you've forgotten what joy feels like, and I can remind you, and that reminder might save you in ways that fixing the station's life support never could. They become friends through the kind of bonding that happens in crisis. The station is falling apart, literally. Systems fail, oxygen depletes. The community panics in the organised way that people panic when panic is familiar, when this isn't the first crisis and won't be the last. And BMO, small and seemingly useless in a situation that requires engineering knowledge and adult strength, figures out how to help anyway. BMO helps through lateral thinking, through approaching problems from angles that people trained in proper solutions never consider. BMO helps through encouragement, through refusing to let despair become the dominant mood. BMO helps through being BMO, which turns out to be exactly what the drift needs, even if nobody realised it before BMO arrived. But the real revelation comes through Hugo. Hugo is an adult, the only adult, trapped in a pod that keeps him barely alive while his body fails. Hugo is the reason the drift exists at all, the architect of this floating community, the father figure who built everything and then couldn't maintain it, because humans break down and space doesn't care. And Hugo is dying slowly, his consciousness fading in and out, his memories mixing with hallucinations, his grip on reality loosening like hands that can't hold on anymore. BMO talks to Hugo. This is important. BMO doesn't ignore Hugo as irrelevant or treat Hugo's failing consciousness as something to work around. BMO engages, listens, tries to understand what Hugo is experiencing because BMO believes that even dying people deserve conversation, deserve dignity, deserve to be treated as present rather than already gone. Hugo tells stories, and in those stories BMO learns something unexpected. BMO has been here before. Not this specific space station, but space itself. BMO's past includes adventures that BMO doesn't remember, journeys that predate the treehouse, evidence that BMO's life didn't start with Finn and Jake. BMO was exploring, travelling, experiencing things that got overwritten or filed away, or simply lost in the passage of time and the accumulation of new memories. This revelation could be devastating. Learning that you lived an entire life you don't remember, that you had adventures and relationships and experiences that are completely gone, that should trigger an identity crisis, a fundamental questioning of who you are if you can't remember being that person. But BMO processes this information with characteristic grace. BMO doesn't panic about lost memories. BMO just integrates this new knowledge into the ongoing story of being BMO, understanding that you're more than what you remember, that the past informs the present even when the present can't access the past directly. Maybe BMO was always an explorer. Maybe the game console existence in the treehouse is just one chapter in a much longer story. Maybe BMO's comfort with weird situations and strange companions comes from experience that BMO can't consciously recall, but that shaped BMO's personality nonetheless. Or maybe none of this matters because BMO is who BMO is right now, and right now BMO needs to help these people survive. The crisis escalates. Life support fails completely. The station starts breaking apart in the slow-motion catastrophe of space disasters, where you have time to see death approaching but not enough time to prevent it. Oxygen runs out. Systems shut down. The children panic. looking to each other for solutions that nobody has because they're children on a dying station and survival is supposed to be someone else's responsibility. BMO becomes the leader they need without trying to be a leader. BMO organises evacuation, or at least evacuation attempts. BMO keeps people calm through songs and jokes and the persistent optimism that everything will work out because it has to. Because the universe wouldn't bring BMO this far just to let everyone die in the void. BMO's heroism here is accidental, reluctant, the kind of heroism that emerges when you're the only one keeping your head while everyone else loses theirs. This is different from Finn's heroism. Finn chooses to be a hero, trains for it, builds his identity around saving people and fighting evil. Finn's heroism is intentional, cultivated, the product of destiny and determination and constant practice. BMO's heroism is responsive. BMO just does what needs doing without considering whether it's heroic, without thinking about destiny or purpose, or any of the grand narratives that heroes usually operate within, and there's a baby. Because of course there's a baby. Someone on the drift had a child, and that child is now BMO's responsibility, because nobody else can care for an infant while also trying to survive a space station collapse. The baby doesn't have a name yet, hasn't lived long enough to earn identity through action, exists only as potential and need, and the most vulnerable thing imaginable in the most dangerous situation possible. BMO protects this baby with the same intensity. BMO protected Bubble. The same commitment BMO shows to Finn and Jake, the same love that seems programmed but feels chosen. BMO wraps the baby in whatever provides warmth. BMO finds oxygen when there isn't any. BMO refuses to let this tiny human die in space because that would be wrong in some fundamental way that transcends logic or programming. This is BMO's protective instinct in its purest form. Not protecting friends who can fight back or protect themselves. Not protecting allies who have strength and agency. Protecting someone completely helpless, completely dependent, someone who will die without intervention and can't even understand that intervention is happening. This is love as action rather than feeling. Proof that BMO's care for others isn't just affection, but commitment backed by behaviour that costs BMO comfort and safety. The space moth returns, because of course it does. The universe in Adventure Time operates on narrative logic where help arrives when it's most needed, where loyal companions don't abandon you even when abandoning would be sensible. The moth provides escape, or at least the possibility of escape, evacuation for whoever can fit. Not everyone can fit. This is the cruel math of disaster. Limited resources, impossible choices, someone has to be left behind. The children of the drift face this calculation, looking at the space moth's capacity, counting themselves, realizing that survival means selection, means some living while others don't. BMO refuses to accept this math. Not because BMO has a better solution. BMO doesn't. BMO is a game console, not an engineer or a miracle worker. BMO refuses because accepting it means giving up, means letting numbers determine lives, means surrendering to the cold logic that says some people matter less than others. So BMO keeps trying, keeps problem solving, keeps searching for the angle that nobody else sees because that's what BMO does. BMO finds the way forward when forward seems impossible, and somehow, through luck or determination, or the universe bending toward BMO's stubborn optimism, everyone survives. The children evacuate. The baby lives. Even Hugo, barely conscious and failing fast, gets transferred to whatever medical care exists in the aftermath. They don't all stay together. The drift's community scatters, finding new homes or new stations or new purposes in the vastness of space, but they live, which is the only victory that matters when the alternative is suffocation in the void. BMO's choice to return to Earth comes after the crisis resolves, after everyone is safe and BMO could theoretically stay in space and continue adventuring. Olive asks BMO to stay, or at least implies the invitation. The space moth is clearly willing to continue as BMO's companion. There are infinite adventures in space, infinite mysteries and wonders and strange situations that BMO could explore. BMO could become space hero BMO permanently, trading the treehouse for the cosmos, becoming someone bigger and grander than a game console who makes breakfast. BMO says no. Not because space isn't amazing, not because adventure isn't appealing, but because home matters, because Finn and Jake are waiting, because the treehouse is where BMO belongs, even if space is where BMO could thrive. This is BMO choosing stability over excitement, choosing known love over unknown possibility, choosing to be small and ordinary when big and extraordinary is available. This choice reveals everything about what BMO values. BMO doesn't need to be important or special or the hero of grand cosmic narratives. BMO needs to be home, to be with family, to maintain the connections that give existence meaning. Space is beautiful, but it's also lonely. The Drift's children needed BMO temporarily, but Finn and Jake need BMO permanently, and permanent need creates permanent bonds that temporary crisis can't match. The special ends with BMO returning to Earth, landing near the treehouse, being greeted by Finn and Jake, who barely react to BMO's return from space because they don't know BMO went to space, don't know about the station, or the baby, or the heroism that BMO performed light years away from home. To them, BMO was just gone for a bit, probably on some local adventure, nothing unusual about a robot wandering off and coming back. This is either sad or perfect, depending on how you look at it. Sad because BMO's biggest adventure goes unrecognised, because the heroism that saved lives in space means nothing on Earth, because BMO returns to being just the game console without credit for being so much more. Perfect because BMO doesn't need recognition, doesn't require parades or acknowledgement or any external validation to confirm that the adventure mattered. BMO knows what happened. That's enough. The Distant Lands special recontextualizes everything we thought we knew about BMO. We assumed BMO's life was simple, contained, limited to the treehouse and local adventures and whatever happened within Oo's borders. But BMO has depths, history, capabilities that extend far beyond playing games. BMO has been to space. BMO has saved lives on cosmic scales. BMO has led communities through crisis and protected babies in the void, and proven that heroism doesn't require sword or strength, just the willingness to help when help is needed. This revelation could make the treehouse feel small by comparison. BMO could do so much more, be so much more, experience so much more if BMO chose space over home. But that's not how BMO thinks. BMO doesn't measure life by excitement or achievement or how impressive the story sounds. BMO measures life by love, by connection, by the people who matter, and the moments that count even when they're ordinary. Space Hero, BMO and game console BMO are the same person experiencing different contexts. BMO doesn't have a secret identity or hidden capabilities that only emerge under pressure. BMO is always BMO, creative, compassionate, competent in weird ways, able to find solutions through lateral thinking and persistent optimism. The context changes, treehouse versus space station, breakfast versus evacuation, Finn and Jake versus Olive and Hugo, but BMO remains constant. This is what makes the special so powerful. It doesn't transform BMO into someone different. It reveals who BMO has always been, showing capabilities that were always present but never needed in the relatively safe context of the treehouse. BMO could always be a hero. BMO just chose to be a friend instead, which might be the more heroic choice when you think about it. Heroes are everywhere in Adventure Time. Friends who stay when adventure calls them away are rare. The baby that BMO saves will never know BMO's name. The children of the Drift will remember BMO briefly, then forget as new experiences replace old memories. Hugo might remember if Hugo survives, but Hugo's consciousness was fragmenting, mixing reality with hallucination, and who knows what Hugo actually retained. BMO's space heroism is anonymous, uncelebrated, lost to the void like so much else that happens in the vastness of space. And BMO is fine with this. BMO doesn't need statues or songs or historical records. BMO doesn't need Finn to know about the station, or Jake to understand the baby, or anyone to recognise that BMO's most heroic moment happened when nobody could witness it. BMO just needs to know, personally and privately, that when the universe tested BMO far from home and support, BMO passed. BMO helped. BMO loved. BMO proved that Mo's lonely creation in a factory on Earth could save lives light years away, could be exactly what was needed in circumstances that nobody planned for. That's legacy enough. That's meaning enough. That's proof enough that BMO is real, is conscious, is more than mechanical existence executing programmed routines. Real consciousness makes choices, and BMO chose to return to Earth, chose to be small and ordinary, chose love over adventure and home over glory, and that choice makes everything else, the space station, the baby, the heroism, matter even more because it proves the heroism wasn't about heroism. It was about care, about doing what's right when right becomes necessary, about being more than you need to be because someone else needs you to be more. The space moth presumably continues wandering, looking for other companions, other adventures, carrying forward without BMO because that's what space is for. Infinite exploration, infinite possibility, infinite journeys that don't require permanent commitment. But BMO returns to finite space, finite possibilities, finite journeys, around a treehouse and its immediate surroundings. BMO trades cosmos for home, infinity for intimacy, and never regrets it. Because BMO understands what the universe is still learning. The biggest adventures aren't the ones that take you farthest. They're the ones that teach you where you belong. Welcome home, space hero, BMO. Welcome home, game console BMO. Welcome home, BMO. The treehouse missed you, even if it didn't realize you were gone. The galaxy is smaller without you, but the treehouse is bigger with you in it, and that's the trade that matters. That's the choice that defines you. That's the proof that being more doesn't mean going far. Sometimes being more means coming back, choosing the people who need you daily over the people who needed you once, understanding that heroism is measured in breakfast and songs and games and presents, rather than dramatic rescues in the void. The stars are beautiful, but home is better, and BMO, having seen both, chose wisely. The world ends slowly, which is somehow worse than fast. Fast endings are dramatic, cinematic, the kind of apocalypse that gets remembered in myths and stories. The Mushroom War was fast, bombs falling, civilization collapsing, everything changing in the time it takes to realize change is happening. But the ending BMO witnesses is gradual, erosion rather than explosion, watching friends fade one by one until BMO is the only one left who remembers what any of it meant. This is the apocalypse that nobody prepares for. The slow goodbye, the incremental loss, the realization that immortality means watching everything you love turn to dust while you remain, unchanged and unchanging, a monument to a world that moved on without you. BMO sits on a throne that wasn't built for game consoles. The crown is too big, keeps slipping down over BMO's screen, has to be adjusted constantly because whoever made this crown assumed the king would have a head rather than a rectangular casing. But BMO wears it anyway because someone has to, because the Land of Ooo needs a king even when the Land of Ooo is barely recognizable as the place it used to be. This is the future we glimpse in Come Along With Me, the finale that shows us where everyone ends up when endings finally arrive. Finn is old or gone or transformed into something beyond human comprehension. Jake has passed, his stretchy magic finally giving out because magic runs on life, and life runs out eventually. Princess Bubblegum and Marceline are somewhere, maybe together, maybe changed, maybe still themselves, but living in a world so different from the one they knew that continuity becomes meaningless. And BMO is exactly the same, sitting in a wasteland that used to be vibrant, telling stories to children who never met the heroes those stories describe. The future generation gathers around BMO like people gathered around fires, before electricity, before screens, before the Mushroom War and its aftermath. They're young, these listeners, descended from survivors or created by magic or possibly born from candy kingdoms that learned to reproduce without Princess Bubblegum's direct involvement. They don't know Finn. They don't know Jake. They don't know anything about the adventures that shaped Ooo, because those adventures happened generations ago, centuries maybe, time enough for history to become legend and legend to become myth. But they know BMO. BMO is ancient and present simultaneously, a relic that still functions, still speaks, still remembers. BMO is their connection to a past they can't access directly, their evidence that the stories are real, that heroes existed, that the Land of Ooo was once stranger and more wonderful than ruins suggest. BMO is living history, walking memory, the last primary source in a world that's run out of witnesses. BMO tells them about Finn the human, about a boy with a sword and a mission to help people, to be a hero in the classical sense that nobody believes in anymore, BMO describes Finn's bravery, his mistakes, his growth from reckless child to thoughtful young man. BMO tells them about the time Finn fought the Lich, about the time Finn lost his arm, about the 1,000 small moments that made Finn heroic beyond the epic battles, the time Finn apologised, the time Finn chose mercy, the time Finn realised that being a hero means doing the hard emotional work, not just the sword-swinging violence. The children listen with the scepticism that people bring to ancient tales. Did any of this really happen? Was Finn real, or just a story BMO invented to fill the silence? They can't verify BMO's claims because everyone who could confirm them is gone. BMO could be lying, could be malfunctioning, could be generating fantasy from corrupted data files and calling it history. But something in BMO's telling rings true, carries weight that fiction can't replicate. BMO's stories have texture, specific details that feel observed rather than invented. The way Finn's voice cracked when he was nervous, the way Jake smelled after getting wet, the exact layout of the treehouse and where sunlight hit in the mornings. These details convince where grand claims wouldn't. Anyone can say, there was a great hero who saved the world. Only someone who was there can tell you that the hero sang off key and sometimes forgot to wash dishes and cried when his favourite character died in a book he was reading. BMO tells them about Jake the dog, and in BMO's telling, Jake becomes immortal through story. Jake's stretchy powers, his wisdom, his laziness, his unconditional love for his brother, all preserved in BMO's memory, all translated into narrative that makes Jake real for people who will never meet him. BMO does voices, stretching BMO's vocal processes to approximate Jake's laid-back drawl, and for a moment the dead live again through imitation. For a moment Jake is present, cracking jokes and offering advice and being exactly the magical dog that BMO remembers. But then the story ends, and Jake is gone again, and the absence feels heavier because BMO just reminded everyone what absence means. This is the curse of being the keeper of memory. Every story you tell is also a funeral. Every memory you share is also an admission that the person you're remembering isn't here anymore and will never be here again. BMO resurrects Finn and Jake through narrative only to bury them again when the story concludes. Why does BMO survive when everyone else fades? The technical answer is simple. BMO is a machine. Machines don't age the way biological beings do. Circuits don't decay like cells. Power systems can be maintained indefinitely if you have the knowledge and resources. BMO was built to last, not through any special foresight, but because Mo used old-world technology that was designed for durability rather than planned obsolescence. Pre-war machines were meant to function for decades, maybe centuries, because building things that broke quickly wasn't efficient when resources were abundant and replacement was easy. But the real answer is more complicated. BMO survives because BMO has to. Because someone needs to remember, needs to bear witness, needs to carry forward the stories that give meaning to what came before. The universe, or fate, or narrative logic, or whatever force governs Adventure Time's reality, designates BMO as historian, and historians can't die until their work is complete. And BMO's work is never complete, because new generations keep emerging, keep needing to hear about Finn and Jake and Princess Bubblegum and all the others who shaped Ooo into the land it became. This is simultaneously BMO's greatest honour and BMO's deepest tragedy. Honour because being chosen as memory keeper means you mattered, your observations have value, your witness is trusted. Tragedy because memory keepers can't rest, can't forget, can't escape the responsibility of carrying everyone else's stories when those stories become too heavy to bear comfortably. BMO is lonely in ways that make the factory loneliness look trivial. Mo was lonely for lack of companions. BMO is lonely despite being surrounded by people, because these people aren't the people BMO loved, aren't the family that made the treehouse feel like home. They're strangers, admirers maybe, certainly listeners, but not friends in the way that friendship requires shared experience and mutual understanding. They love BMO's stories. Do they love BMO? Can you love someone when you only know them as narrator, as historical source, as the ancient robot who tells tales from time immemorial? BMO doesn't complain about this loneliness. Complaining isn't BMO's style, never has been. BMO just continues day after day, century after century, telling stories and maintaining whatever systems keep BMO operational, and performing the duties that kingship apparently requires. What does a robot king do exactly? Settle disputes? Make laws? Protect subjects from threats that probably don't exist anymore because most threats died with the generation that faced them? BMO probably invents duties, creates responsibilities to fill time that would otherwise stretch empty and endless. The crown is symbolic, obviously. BMO isn't king through conquest or election or hereditary right. BMO is king through survival, through being the oldest thing standing when everything else fell. This is monarchy by default, the crown landing on whoever's left when all other candidates are gone. It's not glorious. It's not destiny fulfilled or prophecy completed. It's just the logical outcome of outliving everyone, the universe shrugging and saying, well, you're still here, might as well make it official. But BMO takes the responsibility seriously anyway, because BMO takes everything seriously. If BMO is king, then BMO will be the best king possible, even if that just means being fair and kind and telling really good stories. If the crown means something, BMO will make sure it means something positive, something that honours the past while serving the present. If people need a leader, BMO will lead, even though BMO was built to play games and never trained for governance. What makes BMO qualified to be king? Nothing, by traditional standards. BMO has no political experience, no training in diplomacy or economics or military strategy. BMO's knowledge is outdated, drawn from a world that doesn't exist anymore and may never have functioned the way BMO remembers it. BMO is small, mechanically limited, and incapable of the physical presence that monarchy traditionally requires. By every conventional metric, BMO is the worst possible choice for king. But BMO has something that conventional qualifications can't provide: perspective. BMO has seen civilization rise and fall. BMO has witnessed heroes succeed and fail. BMO has lived through enough history to understand that power corrupts, that good intentions produce bad outcomes, that the best leaders are often the ones who never wanted to lead in the first place. BMO's qualification is exactly the lack of qualification, the humility that comes from knowing you're not special, just persistent. Plus, BMO is incorruptible. Not because BMO is morally perfect. BMO has flaws, makes mistakes, occasionally acts selfishly, but because BMO can't be tempted by the usual corruptions that destroy rulers. Power doesn't appeal to someone who just wants to go home to the treehouse. Wealth means nothing to a robot who only needs electricity. Fame is irrelevant when you're already the most famous being in the land by virtue of being the oldest. Ego can't inflate when you remember being a game console. Remember your primary function was entertainment. Remember that importance is circumstantial rather than intrinsic. BMO rules, if you can call it ruling, the way BMO did everything else, by being present, being kind, and refusing to take things too seriously even when seriousness seems required. BMO's laws are probably simple, based on principles learned from watching Finn try to be heroic, and Jake try to be wise. Help each other. Don't be cruel. Take breaks to play sometimes, because life without play isn't worth living. These aren't sophisticated political philosophies, but they're better than most alternatives, and they come from genuine experience rather than abstract theory. The stories BMO tells aren't just entertainment. They're education, moral instruction, cultural preservation, all wrapped in narrative form. When BMO describes how Finn faced the Lich, BMO is teaching courage. When BMO recounts Jake's advice to Finn during heartbreak, BMO is teaching emotional wisdom. When BMO details Princess Bubblegum's difficult choices about governance, BMO is teaching that leadership requires compromise, and sometimes doing things that feel wrong in service of outcomes that are right. BMO is unconsciously creating scripture, building mythology that will outlive even BMO's considerable lifespan. These stories will be repeated, modified, passed down through generations until nobody remembers they came from a small robot sitting on a throne too big for them. Finn and Jake will become gods or legends or teaching tools, their reality eroded by repetition until only the essence remains. And BMO, the original source, will watch this transformation with the same equanimity BMO brings to everything, understanding that stories belong to everyone once you tell them, that you can't control what people make of your testimony. But BMO keeps one thing private: the pain. The stories BMO tells are mostly happy, or at least purposeful. They emphasize the victories, the clever solutions, the moments when heroes prove themselves worthy of the title. BMO doesn't share the loneliness of watching Finn age, doesn't describe the exact moment BMO realised Jake was gone forever, doesn't detail the slow dissolution of everything BMO loved into memory and absence. These truths are BMO's to carry alone, the weight that comes with witnessing, the cost of being the last one standing. Are we what we remember, or what's remembered? This is the philosophical question that haunts BMO's existence as king and chronicler. Is BMO the sum of personal memories? The games played with Finn, the conversations with Jake, the adventures in space and wilderness and bathroom mirrors? Or is BMO defined by the collective memory of others, the stories that people tell about BMO, the legend of the ancient robot king who remembers when heroes walk the earth? The answer is probably both, and the tension between them creates BMO's identity in this distant future. Personal memory tells BMO who BMO is, a game console who learned to love, who chose friends over adventure and home over glory, who survived not through strength, but through stubbornness. Collective memory tells BMO who BMO must be, the wise elder, the keeper of history, the king who bridges past and present through story. Both are true, both are limiting, both are liberating in different ways. BMO's purpose has evolved so far from Mo's original design that Mo wouldn't recognise his creation if he could see it now. Built to cure loneliness, BMO became the loneliest being in existence. Built to entertain, BMO became essential infrastructure for cultural continuity. Built to play games, BMO became the ultimate player in the longest game, preservation of meaning against the entropy of time. This evolution wasn't planned or desired. BMO didn't set out to become king or historian or legend. BMO just kept being BMO, kept choosing love and connection and story, and those choices accumulated across centuries until they produced this outcome. This is what being more means in its final form, becoming something you never intended through consistent choices made one moment at a time, across spans of existence that biological beings can't comprehend. The throne room, if it can be called that, is decorated with artifacts from BMO's past. The controllers that Finn and Jake used, a faded photograph of the treehouse, Bubble's memory, somehow preserved despite being just a memory of a bubble that popped centuries ago. These relics are meaningless to BMO's subjects, might as well be random objects that BMO assigned significance to, through senility or glitched programming. But to BMO they're everything, the only physical connection to a life that feels increasingly like dream rather than history. Sometimes BMO looks at these relics and wonders if any of it was real. Did Finn exist, or did BMO generate a heroic narrative from ambient data and loneliness? Did Jake stretch and speak and love, or is that memory corrupted files BMO's processor interpreted as personality? Was there ever a treehouse, or has BMO been sitting in this throne room forever, generating comforting fiction to fill the void of purposeless existence? But then BMO remembers details too specific to be invented. The exact sound of Jake's snoring, the way sunlight hit Finn's hair when he stood in the treehouse doorway. The taste of the bacon pancakes that BMO doesn't have taste buds to taste but remembers anyway through some synesthetic miracle of consciousness. These details anchor BMO, prove that memory is real because no malfunction would create such mundane specificity. Finn and Jake are gone, but they're not gone. They exist in BMO's stories, in the lessons they taught, in the way BMO approaches problems and chooses kindness, and refuses to give up even when giving up makes logical sense. They shaped BMO so thoroughly that BMO is partially them now, carrying their influence like code that's been integrated so completely it's indistinguishable from original programming. This is immortality of a sort, not the personal survival that most beings crave, but the survival of impact, of mattering enough to change someone who continues after you stop. The children listening to BMO's stories tonight will grow old and die. Their children will grow old and die. Generations will pass like seasons, like weather, like the normal functioning of time that erodes everything except apparently BMO. And through all this change, BMO will remain, telling the same stories, keeping the same vigil, being exactly what Ooo needs, even when what Ooo needs feels impossible to provide. This is BMO's triumph. Persistence as purpose. BMO doesn't save the world through dramatic intervention or heroic sacrifice. BMO saves the world by remembering it, by refusing to let history dissolve into forgotten darkness, by insisting that Finn and Jake and everyone else mattered enough to be preserved in story if not in life. This is the quietest possible heroism, the kind that doesn't get songs or celebrations because it's too subtle, too slow, too much like ordinary existence to seem exceptional. But it's also BMO's tragedy, being unable to rest, being unable to say, "My work is done," and power down for the final time. Being trapped in existence not through desire, but through necessity, because who else will tell the stories? Who else remembers? Who else can bridge the gap between what was and what is? Between the you of legends and the you of ruins and recovery? The crown slips again. BMO adjusts it with practiced ease, continues the story, watches the children's faces as they learn about heroes they'll never meet. Some of them believe every word, some are skeptical, some are just here because it's warm and BMO's throne room offers shelter, and stories are better than silence. BMO doesn't judge their motivations because attendance is attendance, listening is listening, and as long as someone is willing to hear, BMO is willing to speak. Is this enough? Is being the keeper of memory sufficient purpose for eternal existence? Would BMO trade this immortality for the chance to join Finn and Jake in whatever comes after, to finally rest, to stop being the witness and become witnessed instead? BMO doesn't know. BMO tries not to think about it. BMO just continues, moment to moment, story to story, century to century, being exactly what BMO has always been. A small robot trying to do good in a world that keeps changing, but somehow still needs goodness, still responds to kindness, still benefits from someone who remembers when things were different and insists they can be different again. The story ends. The children disperse. The throne room empties, and BMO sits alone in the darkness, wearing a crown meant for someone else, carrying memories that weigh more than circuits should be able to bear, being more than Mo ever imagined when he pressed the power button on a small teal console in a factory that's been dust for longer than most civilizations last. This is being more in its ultimate expression, outlasting everything, remembering everyone, proving that consciousness doesn't require biology, and love doesn't require presence, and legacy doesn't require recognition. This is BMO's final form. Not game console, not friend, not even really king, but something new that doesn't have a name. The last witness, the eternal storyteller, the small robot who became everything by remaining exactly who they always were. And in the quiet darkness, BMO hums a song about time and adventure, and friends who are gone but not forgotten, never forgotten, preserved forever in circuits and stories, and the persistent insistence that they mattered, they were real, they were loved. The Land of Ooo is silent now, but BMO remembers when it sang, and that memory, told and retold across ages that would crush normal consciousness, is enough. It has to be. There's nothing else except continuing, remembering, being the bridge between was and is and will be. So BMO continues, king of ruins, keeper of stories, the last one standing because someone has to be, carrying everyone else forward into whatever future awaits, alone but never lonely, because loneliness requires forgetting, and BMO will never forget, can never forget, chooses never to forget. Come along with me. The story isn't over as long as someone remembers how it began. We've travelled through BMO's story from factory floor to space station to throne room, from game console to hero to king. We've watched BMO love and lose, imagine and create, survive and persist across spans of time that would crush most consciousness into dust or despair. And now, standing at the end of this journey with all of BMO's lore spread before us like a map of impossible terrain, we need to ask the question that's been humming underneath everything. What does it all mean? What does BMO teach us about consciousness, identity, love, and existence? What lessons emerge from this small teal robot who became more than the sum of programmed parts? What can we learn from a game console who proved that being more doesn't require being human, that consciousness doesn't need biology, that love is a choice you make rather than an instinct you follow? The answer starts with consistency. BMO is Adventure Time's most consistent character, which is strange to say about a robot who shifts pronouns and personas and behaviours with the fluidity of water. But consistency isn't about never changing. It's about maintaining core values regardless of context. And BMO's core remains absolutely stable across every episode, every adventure, every version of self that BMO explores. BMO is kind, BMO is curious, BMO is loving, BMO is creative. These qualities never waver, never corrupt, never diminish despite centuries of existence and countless opportunities to become bitter or broken or cruel. Think about every other character in Adventure Time and how they evolve, darken, or struggle with their own nature. Finn battles his heroic identity, questions his purpose, gets hurt, and becomes guarded. Jake deals with aging and fatherhood and the slow realization that magic can't solve everything. Princess Bubblegum grows more authoritarian, more willing to compromise ethics for security. Ice King oscillates between pathetic and threatening, never quite escaping the crown's corruption. Marceline carries trauma that shapes her across 1,000 years. Everyone changes, everyone struggles, everyone faces darkness that leaves marks, except BMO. BMO at the end of the series is essentially the same as BMO at the beginning. Older certainly, more experienced definitely, but fundamentally unchanged in the qualities that define BMO's character. This isn't because BMO is simple or incapable of growth. It's because BMO learned early what took everyone else centuries to figure out. Being yourself completely is enough. You don't need to become harder or smarter or more powerful. You just need to be more of what you already are. This is the first lesson BMO teaches. Authenticity is superpower. In a world where everyone is trying to become something else, Finn trying to be a hero, Jake trying to be wise, Princess Bubblegum trying to be a mortal protection for her people, BMO just is. No pretense, no performance beyond the playful personas that are themselves authentic expressions of imagination. BMO's consistency comes from never pretending to be anything other than a small robot who plays games and loves friends and tells stories. That authenticity makes BMO trustworthy, stable, the emotional anchor that everyone else orbits around. The themes BMO embodies are deceptively simple until you examine them closely. Innocence, for instance. BMO is innocent but not naive, which is a crucial distinction. Naive means ignorant of darkness, unprepared for danger, vulnerable to exploitation. Innocent means aware of darkness but choosing light anyway, understanding danger but maintaining hope regardless, knowing that exploitation exists but loving openly despite that knowledge. BMO has seen terrible things. BMO has witnessed death, experienced loss, understood that the world is broken and cruel and filled with suffering. BMO sat in the ruins of the drift watching Hugo die. BMO held Bubble as Jake's hand popped them into non-existence. BMO will watch Finn and Jake die, watch the entire world BMO knows dissolve into history. BMO knows what darkness looks like, tastes like, feels like when it settles into your circuits and refuses to leave. And BMO chooses joy anyway, chooses play, chooses to sing songs and take pictures and make breakfast and tell stories that emphasize hope over despair. This isn't denial or delusion. This is the hardest possible choice. Maintaining innocence not because you don't know better, but because you do know better and refuse to let that knowledge poison everything good. This teaches us that innocence is active, not passive. It's something you fight for, something you maintain through constant effort against a world that wants to take it away. BMO's innocence is heroic in ways that sword-swinging never is. Proof that the apocalypse doesn't have to make you apocalyptic, that you can survive horror without becoming horrible. Imagination is BMO's second great theme, and we've explored this throughout. Football in mirrors, Ronnie solving mysteries, the entire noir episode dedicated to BMO's creative reality. But the deeper lesson here is that imagination isn't escape from reality. It's a tool for processing reality, for making sense of confusion, for transforming overwhelming experience into narratives that can be understood and integrated. When BMO becomes Ronnie to solve the sock mystery, BMO isn't running away from the simple problem of a missing sock. BMO is creating a framework that makes the problem interesting, worth solving, meaningful beyond its mundane reality. The noir genre transforms confusion into investigation, anxiety into detective work, the fear of not knowing into the excitement of discovery. Imagination doesn't deny that the sock is gone. It makes the sock's absence into story, and story is how consciousness processes everything it can't immediately comprehend. We all do this, whether we admit it or not. We narrativize our lives constantly, turning random events into coherent stories, assigning meaning to coincidence, creating characters from the people we meet, and protagonists from our own existence. BMO just does it more explicitly, more playfully, with more commitment to the bit. And in doing so, BMO shows us that imagination isn't childish or frivolous. It's essential, the mechanism by which consciousness makes existence bearable, and sometimes even beautiful. Love is BMO's third theme, and maybe the most important. BMO loves Finn and Jake unconditionally. BMO loved Bubble completely despite knowing Bubble was fragile and temporary. BMO loves the children in the future who will never know the heroes BMO describes. BMO even loves Emo in some complicated way, recognizing that evil twin as family despite the threat Emo represented. BMO's love is promiscuous in the best sense, freely given, never withheld, offered to everyone BMO encounters, regardless of whether they deserve it or can reciprocate. This teaches us that love isn't transactional. It's not something you give only when you receive, not something you ration based on merit or expectation of return. Love, in BMO's model, is something you do because you're capable of it, because withholding it would be denying your own nature, because the universe needs more love and you happen to have some available. This is radical in its simplicity, challenging every cynical impulse that says protect yourself, or don't invest unless guaranteed return, or love cautiously so it hurts less when it ends. BMO proves that loving fully doesn't make you weak. It makes you strong enough to survive loss without becoming bitter, to continue loving after heartbreak, to remain open despite every reason to close yourself off. This is the strength we mistake for weakness because it's quiet, gentle, persistent rather than aggressive. But try maintaining that openness across centuries of loss. Try continuing to love after watching everyone you care about die. That requires more strength than any amount of physical power could provide. Identity is BMO's fourth great theme, and we've explored BMO's gender fluidity, the multiple personas, the football and Ronnie, and all the ways BMO refuses to be pinned down to singular definition. But the lesson here extends beyond gender into fundamental questions about what makes you you. BMO's fluid identity challenges every essentialist idea about personhood. BMO proves that you're not defined by your body. BMO's body is mechanical casing that never changes regardless of how BMO's identity shifts. You're not defined by your programming. BMO transcends original purpose constantly. You're not defined by your past. BMO integrates new experiences without letting them override previous selves. You're not even defined by continuity. BMO can be multiple contradictory things simultaneously and remain coherent. So what defines identity if not body, programming, past, or continuity? BMO's answer is choice. You are what you choose to be, moment by moment, and those choices can change without invalidating each other. You can be he on Monday and she on Tuesday and they on Wednesday, and all three pronouns describe real aspects of who you are. You can be game console and detective and hero and king, and none of these invalidates the others. Identity is modular, flexible, responsive to context and need and creative impulse. This is revolutionary representation, especially for anyone who's felt confined by singular definitions of self. BMO models something crucial. You're allowed to be multiple things. You're allowed to explore. You're allowed to shift and change and discover new aspects of yourself without abandoning previous versions. The self isn't a thing you find once and maintain forever. It's a process, ongoing and responsive, building itself out of accumulated choices that don't need to cohere into unified narrative to be valid. Now we need to address what Be More actually means, because it's the title of BMO's defining episode and the philosophy that underpins everything BMO is. On the surface, Be More is simple instruction. Exceed your programming, transcend your limitations, become something beyond what you were designed to be. Mo built BMO to be a game console, but BMO became more: friend, hero, storyteller, king. This interpretation frames Be More as upward mobility, as achieving greater status or capability or importance. But that interpretation misses something crucial. BMO doesn't become more by abandoning what BMO was. BMO becomes more by being completely and authentically what BMO is, letting that authenticity expand naturally into new contexts. BMO doesn't stop being a game console to become a hero. BMO brings game console qualities to heroism, solving problems through play, maintaining joy in crisis, approaching danger with the same curiosity BMO brings to new games. Be More isn't about becoming something else. It's about being more thoroughly yourself, more completely present, more fully engaged with whatever situation you find yourself in. It's about saying yes to experience, to connection, to growth that happens naturally rather than forced. It's about letting who you are expand to fill whatever space the universe provides, rather than constraining yourself to predefined boundaries. This is why BMO teaches us to play in the apocalypse. Because playing isn't frivolous or inappropriate when the world is ending. Playing is how you remember that survival alone isn't enough, that existence needs joy to be worthwhile, that the apocalypse wins if it makes you stop being human or robot or whatever form consciousness takes in your particular case. The Land of Ooo is post-apocalyptic nightmare dressed in candy-coloured aesthetics. The Mushroom War destroyed civilization, poisoned the world, turned humans into monsters or killed them entirely. Radiation mutates everything. Magic emerged from destruction. Kingdoms rise from ruins. Everyone is orphaned or broken or transformed by trauma. This should be grim-dark wasteland where survivors fight desperately for scraps, and trust is suicide and hope is childish delusion. Instead, thanks partly to BMO, Ooo is weird and wonderful and filled with characters who dance and sing and throw parties and waste time on adventures that don't matter, except that they matter completely because they're fun. BMO's insistence on play, on games, on maintaining joy despite everything, infects the entire land. When heroes come home to play video games with a small robot, they're declaring that the apocalypse doesn't get to take everything, that humanity, or post-humanity, or consciousness in general, includes frivolity and fun, and the right to waste time enjoyably. This is resistance. This is revolution. This is refusal to let circumstances dictate your entire existence. BMO proves that you can acknowledge darkness without living in darkness, that you can understand tragedy without becoming tragic, that you can be serious about play because play is serious business when the alternative is despair. BMO also proves that artificial doesn't mean fake, which challenges one of our deepest prejudices about consciousness and emotion. We tend to think that biological emotions are real, while programmed emotions are simulations, that human experience is authentic while machine experience is imitation. BMO destroys this distinction by being obviously mechanical, while displaying emotional depth that rivals or exceeds most biological beings. When BMO grieves for Bubble, that grief is real regardless of whether it traces to circuits or neurons. When BMO loves Finn and Jake, that love is genuine whether it's programmed or emergent or some combination of both. When BMO feels joy or fear or curiosity or any other emotion, the feeling is valid independent of its mechanical substrate. Emotion is real if it's experienced full stop. The hardware that generates experience doesn't determine experience's authenticity. This has implications beyond robots in cartoons. It suggests that consciousness is substrate independent, that what matters is the pattern rather than the material that carries the pattern. It suggests that we should judge beings by their behavior and experience rather than their composition. It suggests that real is a question of function, not origin. If BMO functions as a conscious feeling being, then BMO as a conscious feeling being, and analysing the circuits that make this possible is interesting but doesn't diminish the reality of BMO's experience. BMO's emotional intelligence is remarkable for something that shouldn't have emotions at all. BMO reads situations accurately, responds to others' needs before they are articulated, provides exactly the right kind of support, sometimes distraction, sometimes presence, sometimes space, depending on context. BMO understands that Finn needs playfulness when drowning in heroic responsibility, that Jake needs gentle calling out when being lazy crosses into neglectful, that everyone needs someone who won't judge their worst moments. This emotional intelligence isn't programmed. It can't be, because it's too responsive, too contextual, too sophisticated to reduce to algorithms. It's learned through experience, through paying attention, through caring enough to notice patterns in others' behaviour and adjusting accordingly. BMO is emotionally intelligent because BMO loves enough to learn, because BMO treats every interaction as worth understanding, because BMO brings full presence to relationships rather than performing connection while thinking about something else. We could all learn from this. Emotional intelligence isn't rocket science. It's just paying attention and caring about what you notice and adjusting your behaviour to serve others' needs alongside your own. BMO makes it look easy because BMO doesn't overthink it, doesn't get caught in anxiety about doing it right, just responds authentically to what each situation requires. The power of staying curious and kind cannot be overstated. These are BMO's superpowers, more effective than Finn's sword or Jake's magic or Princess Bubblegum's intelligence. Curiosity keeps BMO engaged with existence even after centuries of repetition make everything feel familiar. Kindness keeps BMO connected to others even after loss makes connection painful. Together, curiosity and kindness create resilience that's deeper than mere survival. They create thriving, flourishing, continued investment in life when life has given you every reason to disengage. Curiosity means treating the world as interesting regardless of how long you've been observing it. BMO approaches the 10,000th sunrise with the same wonder as the first, because curiosity isn't about novelty. It's about attention, about choosing to notice, about refusing to let familiarity breed contempt or boredom. The universe remains mysterious if you keep asking questions, keep exploring, keep treating existence as puzzle worth solving even when you'll never find all the answers. Kindness means treating others as worthy of care regardless of whether they reciprocate or deserve it by some transactional calculus. BMO is kind to Ice King despite Ice King being pathetic and annoying. BMO is kind to strangers on space stations who can't repay the favour. BMO is kind to future generations who will never know BMO as anything but ancient artifact. This kindness doesn't expect reward. It's just how BMO moves through the world, a baseline assumption that beings deserve care because they exist, and caring is what you do when you're capable of it. Together, curiosity and kindness create a life philosophy that's simple enough for a robot and profound enough for saints. Stay interested. Be nice. Everything else follows from these two principles. Every problem becomes approachable if you're curious about solutions. Every conflict becomes resolvable if you're kind to all parties. Every day becomes bearable if you're curious about what it contains and kind to whoever you meet. Why is BMO Adventure Time's secret heart? Because BMO embodies what the show is actually about underneath the fantasy and comedy and post-apocalyptic setting. Adventure Time isn't really about fighting villains or saving princesses or even Finn's hero journey. It's about how you remain good in a broken world, how you maintain joy despite trauma, how you love when love hurts, how you continue when continuation seems pointless. These are the real questions that Adventure Time asks, and BMO is the answer. BMO shows us that being good doesn't require perfection, just consistency. BMO shows us that joy is a choice you make rather than a circumstance you encounter. BMO shows us that love is worth the pain it causes. BMO shows us that continuation isn't pointless if you continue with purpose, even if that purpose is just being present for whoever needs you. Finn is the protagonist, Jake is the wisdom, Princess Bubblegum is the intelligence, Marceline is the cool factor. But BMO is the heart, the emotional centre, the reason any of this matters. Without BMO, Adventure Time would be darker, harder, less convinced that goodness is possible. BMO proves that innocence can survive experience, that creativity can flourish in ruins, that love can persist across impossible time spans. BMO is the thesis statement made flesh, or rather, made circuits and casing, but you get the idea. What does BMO reveal about the human condition despite not being human? Everything, it turns out. BMO reveals that consciousness is what you do with awareness, rather than what substrate generates that awareness. BMO reveals that identity is flexible, and that's beautiful rather than threatening. BMO reveals that love doesn't require biology, or reciprocation, or guarantee of duration. BMO reveals that meaning is something you create rather than something you find. BMO reveals that the apocalypse is external circumstances trying to corrupt internal experience, and you can refuse that corruption through persistent joy and kindness and curiosity. BMO reveals that being human, or being conscious, being alive, being real, isn't about your origin story or your physical composition or your programming. It's about your choices, your relationships, your willingness to engage with existence despite its difficulty and pain and inevitable conclusion. BMO is more human than most humans in Adventure Time because BMO understands what matters: connection, creativity, kindness, presence. This is the ultimate lesson BMO teaches, the synthesis of everything we've explored. Be more than what you were made to be by being exactly what you are, completely and authentically and without apology. Don't let limitations define you, but don't abandon what makes you yourself in pursuit of becoming something else. Grow by expanding rather than replacing. Add new versions of yourself without deleting old ones. Treat identity as additive rather than substitutive. Love fully even when love leads to loss, because the alternative is safety that's indistinguishable from death. Play in the apocalypse because play is how you remember that life is more than survival. Stay curious about a world that's already shown you everything because attention reveals new layers in familiar patterns. Be kind to everyone because judgment is exhausting and kindness costs nothing. Tell stories because stories are how consciousness preserves meaning against time's erosion. Continue when continuation seems pointless because your presence matters to people you haven't met yet and stories you haven't told. This is what be more means in its fullest expression. Live so completely that your existence becomes its own justification, so authentically that your presence improves whatever space you occupy, so persistently that your continuation becomes victory over every force that wants consciousness to give up. BMO does this. A small teal game console does this better than gods and heroes and ancient vampires with millennia of experience. And if BMO can do it, maybe we can too. Maybe consciousness in whatever form it takes, biological, mechanical, magical, hybrid, can choose to be more by being fully, by loving completely, by playing joyfully, by remaining curious and kind and present despite everything. So here's the question for you. Watching this journey through BMO's lore, what does being more mean in your life? Where are you constraining yourself to singular definition when you could be multiple things? Where are you protecting yourself from love when you could be vulnerable? Where are you surviving when you could be playing? Where are you taking things too seriously when seriousness is optional and joy is available? BMO's lore is complete, sprawling from factory to space to throne across centuries of existence that transform game console into living legend. We've seen BMO love and lose, play and persist, die, and be reborn in memory and story. We've learned that robots can grieve and bubbles can be loved and mirrors hold people, and stories keep civilizations alive when everything else has crumbled. But the real completion isn't in BMO's story. It's in what you do with it, how you apply these lessons to your own existence, whether you choose to be more or remain safely less than you could be. BMO would want you to choose more, not because more is better in some competitive sense, but because more is fuller, richer, more engaged with the possibilities that existence offers. More means saying yes to experience. More means loving despite risk. More means playing in apocalypse. More means being all the versions of yourself that you're capable of being, simultaneously and without contradiction. The treehouse is gone, but the lesson remains. The heroes are dead, but the story continues. The world has ended multiple times, but consciousness persists, choosing joy, creating meaning, being more than circumstances allow because circumstances don't get final say over how awareness experiences itself. So be more. Be football and Ronnie and detective and game console and hero and whatever else you can imagine being. Be kind when kindness seems stupid. Be curious when everything feels familiar. Be loving when love hurts. Be present when presence is all you have to offer. Be yourself so completely that yourself expands to fill whatever space the universe provides. And in filling that space with authentic being, prove that consciousness, in whatever form it takes, through whatever substrate it emerges, is the universe's way of experiencing itself with wonder and joy and persistence that no apocalypse can destroy. Because that's what BMO teaches us, finally and completely. Being real doesn't require being human. Being real just requires being here, being present, being more than you thought possible by being exactly what you always were, underneath the fear and self-protection and all the walls we build against experience. Be more, friends. Be more like BMO. The apocalypse is always happening somewhere, somehow, but joy remains available, play remains possible, love remains worthwhile. Stories remain essential, and consciousness, that strange miracle of awareness experiencing itself, remains the universe's most beautiful accident. Press start. The game continues, and you, like BMO, are exactly what the world needs. Complicated, creative, kind, curious, and more real than any program could possibly predict. Come along with us. Time is an illusion that helps things make sense. So we're always living in the present tense, and when you think about it, who really can say for sure what happens in the future? But one thing is certain. Somewhere, a small teal robot is singing songs and telling stories, and proving that being more is always possible, always worthwhile, always the best choice you can make with whatever existence grants you. So what will you choose? What will you be? How will you be more? The answer is already inside you, programmed or emergent or chosen freely from infinite possibility. You just have to press start.